Good afternoon. This is a committee of the whole hearing on, this is Monday, February the 5th, 2024. Charm City TV, you told me that we're up. Are we still good? Because if we are, we can't see it out here. Just want to make sure we're good. All right. This is Monday, February the 5th, 2024. It's approximately 2:18 p.m. I'm President Nick J. Mosby here with this committee of the whole hearing this afternoon. This is going to be on legislative oversight LO 230053, agency briefing and grants management. And then right following that hearing will be on resolution 23-0205R, investigative hearing for the procurement here in the city of Baltimore. To my left, we have Councilwoman Odette Ramos. We have next, we have Chairman Mark Conway. We have Chairman Eric Costello. We have Councilwoman Felicia Porter. We have Chairman Robert Stokes. And last and certainly not least, we have Madam Vice President Sharon Green Middleton from the Council President's Office. We have Tiffany Macklin, as well as Aaron DeGraffin Wright. And then from Council Services, we have Larry Green. I'm going to ask for the administration, if you could each mute yourself and just pronounce your name and your title for the record so we can begin.
Sure. Faith Leach, Chief Administrative Officer.
Tyler Shanella, City Council Liaison.
Alice Kennedy, Housing Commissioner.
Christopher Lundy, Director of the Mayor's Office of Small and Minority Business Advocacy and Development.
Ernestina Simmons, the Director for the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services.
Elizabeth Tatum, Deputy Director, Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs.
Shemaya Kearney, Chief Recovery Officer, Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs.
Michael Moxton, Chief Financial Officer for the City of Baltimore.
Adam Manny, Chief Procurement Officer.
Bob Sanemy, Deputy Budget Director. Deputy Finance Director, sorry, I'm still.
Ihuoma Emenuga, Acting Commissioner of Health.
Hello, Kelly Eastman, Chief of Staff and Chief Operating Officer for the Baltimore City Health Department.
Joanna Mositas, Deputy Director of Finance.
Julie Floyd, Bureau Chief, Bureau of Accounting and Payroll Services.
Thank you. As we get started, again, Legislative Oversight LO 230053, agency briefing on grants management. As for the purpose of calling on the Chief Administrative Officer and pertinent agency representatives to come before the committee to brief the City Council about the city's grants management process and functions. The reason that we are here and some of the work that the Council's been doing in this past term is ensuring that we have some of these really important opportunities for discussion between the administration and the Council and do it in lieu of doing everything during the budget process. It's an opportunity for us to provide full transparency, not only to the general public, but also to the working members of not only the entire committee, but specifically the Ways and Means Committee as we go down the path of doing budgets. We really want to push to turn the budget session into an X and O's, really talk about the finances, and then some of the other more performance and functional things associated with administration provide opportunity throughout the year. That way we're not here for, you know, a 180-hour marathon at times for budget hearings. That's not to say that that's not going to stop some of those questions, because I'm pretty sure some of that stuff will come up, but we thought it was really good to kind of segregate out and really talk about some of these really, really important things. One thing that constantly come up, not just on the Board of Estimates, but as we've seen through the Council, is grants. So that's why this body has decided to go down this path for grants management. At this time, Madam CAO, are you going to be the quarterback for us today? All right, the floor is yours.
All right. Do we have the presentation up? Oh. Okay.
Oh. So, folks that are, if anyone's tuned into Charm City TV, we had some technical issues to start the hearing. That's why we started late from a WebEx perspective, and now we're working, Madam CAO, to see where the presentation is. Sorry, since we had the snafu with WebEx, trying to work out a different solution to pull up the presentation, so stand by. Actually, what we'll do is, if we could just give like 10 minutes for recess, so if someone needs to go to the bathroom or do something else, it's no point in sitting around. We'll come back.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started again. I'll be taking over in the meantime. Looks like we have the presentation ready to go. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, to Madam CAO.
All right. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Faith Leach, and I serve as the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Baltimore. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the executive oversight of the city's grants management ecosystem, to provide an overview of the grants management process, and to discuss ongoing work to strengthen compliance, implement standard operating procedures, and refine our technology tools and city processes to streamline our grants process. Next slide. Next slide. In September 2023, in partnership with the Finance Department and the Office of Performance and Innovation, I established the Grants Management Coordinating Committee, or GrantStat, a monthly convening of all agency leaders and fiscal officers with more than $10 million in federal, state, or private grant funds. The GCC's approach is fourfold. 1, collect and analyze grant expenditure data. A snapshot of our grants tracker can be seen on the next slide. Next slide. 2, to map grant processes and identify areas for improvement. 3, track audit findings and corrective action plans from the city's single audit. And 4, professionalize the grants management staff across the city enterprise by providing access to in-person and on-demand training for grants staff, and to reform the centralized grants management function within the Department of Finance. In addition to the GCC, we have identified opportunities to streamline and improve the Board of Estimates process. Currently, grants go to the Board of Estimates for acceptance of a grant award. This process generally takes 3 to 5 months, as the grant must go through legal, pre-audits, budget, et cetera. That same award goes to the BOE for approval to spend grant funding, and then to our federal or state government partners for their signature, which can take another 3 months. Together, this process can take 6 or more months before we can actually get dollars on the streets to our subrecipients. In partnership with the Comptroller's Office, we recently streamlined the process by which we get grant approval for subrecipients for DHCD. Now the award amounts go to the board as an attachment to the overall grant, which prior to this process had to go individually to the board to be executed. We are now saving months by streamlining this process. We have an opportunity to further streamline the BOE process by noting grants instead of sending them through the full review process, which will save the city 3 to 5 months. Council members, changing antiquated systems requires partnership. I am proud to work in partnership with the Council President's Office as well as the Comptroller's Office. Through weekly meetings I convene to identify opportunities to streamline and improve the BOE process and to implement reforms. Next, you will hear from city agencies about their grants process. The agencies will appear in the following order. The Department of Finance will go first, and they will provide an overview of the city's grants management infrastructure and our grants management system. Then you will hear from the Baltimore City Health Department, the Department of Housing and Community Development, the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, and the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. I will now turn it over to the Finance Department.
Thank you so much. We're going to talk today about how we manage grants, and let's go to the next slide. How we manage grants today and how we are going to manage grants in the future, because there's a lot of changes in this area, and we've done some very exciting work just in the last 1 to 2 years to really strengthen this process and protect the dollars that come to the city. Next slide. The Department of Finance assists with the oversight and support of grants around the city in 2 primary ways, and that is accounting and the grants management team. On the accounting side, BAPS, the Bureau of Accounting and Payroll Services, has been working with the Department of Audits under the Comptroller to track findings and address them throughout the year. We've made significant strides in this work as the Workday system now allows us to see for the first time where the problems actually are. We are also adding resources to the accounting area, including a new manager as well as an accounting systems analyst that will be focused on analytics and compliance. They will also serve as the functional lead for Workday within the Workday grants within the Department of Finance. The grants management team has in the past been tasked with developing citywide policies to direct agencies, issue work tags, and serve as a resource for troubleshooting. In the future, we will be significantly expanding the capacity and function of this team, which I will talk more about shortly. Let's see. Next slide. Thank you. Bridging the technology gap has been a big part of our approach, and after a lot of hard work by agencies as well as our central teams to tackle the Workday transition, we're now finally starting to see some major successes. I'm going to pass it over to Deputy Finance Director Ioana Moisides to talk you through some of the details of those technology changes.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Director. So I'll talk a little bit about technology, and as the Director mentioned, it's not just technology, right? So it's people, technology, and policy are some of the key areas. So for technology and grant accounting, we implemented the grants account module. And really, I'd like to tie this into prior findings on audit reports, and not just last year, but for many years, we've seen some of the same issues with the information that we have available and the reporting that we're able to do. And so what you see on these slides, for each of these bullets, they really address or speak to prior findings where we had some weaknesses that we could improve on. So grant awards, they're now set up with key grant information, right? The UEI, the grant award identifiers, the sponsor, the award amount, the term or length of the grant award. If you can remember in prior systems, that information did not reside in our system and was not available to everyone. It was really information that was only available if you were to go and talk to some of the diligent fiscal folks in the agencies that had really incredible spreadsheets but that never fed into the system. As costs are expended against a grant, the system can recognize the revenue and track it back to the grant. We have the capability, again, to track the expenditures against the individual grant budget, and approvals are required if the expenditures exceed the grant budget. Post-go live, through the incredible feedback from our agencies, in part through some of the regular sessions that you're going to hear about, we actually added specific grant approval roles to spend business processes. So those are the things like paying invoices, ad hoc payments, requisitions, to enable agency grant managers to actually see and approve in the workflow prior to those being charged to the grants. So that was a really critical change that we made post-go live. That was based in part because of the hard work and the feedback of the agencies. We do have further enhancements for sponsor billing and subrecipient monitoring that are being reviewed, and again, it's a continual process, right, of agency feedback, of Workday updates, which come quarterly, and then evaluating what's appropriate for us to adopt as a city. And then requests for new grant numbers are actually entered and tracked through Workday. So next slide. There are controls that were implemented that weren't available before, and I mentioned one of those, budget check. There are data entry requirements, so we were actually able to make, in certain business processes, like a hard stop if you didn't insert information in certain fields. Custom report creation, we have some critical grants monitoring reports that we've created, and again, that's something that is under continual development. Grant work tags, right? Work tags are the identifiers that track spending on a grant, and that grant work tag request process now occurs through Workday. And the UEI registration process, and this is both within Workday, right? So having that identifier field available. But then there's also been work by the Grants Management Office outside of Workday to pull information from SAM, the government reporting site, identify who had active UEIs, who didn't, and follow up with the agencies. So as you can see, Workday helps, but again, doesn't solve all of our problems. I wanted to drill down on the next slide on creating a new grant work tag, just to highlight kind of how, one piece of how one control looks, to give an example, although obviously you could do that with other controls like the budget check. So agencies that receive awards, federal, state, or state, submit those requests for a work tag through the Create Request task in Workday. It goes straight to the GMO staff. And staff there can review the documentation. They'll review the relevant information like the grant name, the hierarchy, the cost centers. If there's information that's missing, they can either send it back or they can outright reject it. And they have the opportunity to provide the comments right in that in the system. And so all of that is retained and available for us to look at after the fact. Since Workday Phase 2 implementation in August 2022, the GMO has processed about 1,283 grant work tags. So the following slides just show you what it looks like for the agency when they're going to submit that request and what some of the information that they're required to provide. And then you can see that it provides prompts, right? So attach BOE approval and all other relevant documentation, and gives some examples of that. And then you can see where that icon says PDF. I'm sorry, it's the following slide, and then the next one after that. You're going to see that where that PDF is, someone who was looking at that Create Grant request can actually pop right in, click on that, and pull up the document and review it as well. And then it appears, the next slide just shows how it will appear in someone's inbox for the next person that's in line to approve it. So that's just one drill down. The important thing to remember too on the next slide is it's called training sessions, but I really look at it as much more than that. They're really, these sessions have been creating the structure by which we as a city collaborate citywide, share information, share best practices, and also share how to do the work we do on a daily basis. And so you're going to see that the cadence at Go Live for some of the grants work streams meetings started weekly and have moved to bi-weekly. You're going to see that there are larger group meetings, so we have some citywide grants meetings that are 30 to 70 people, but then we also have the opportunity for agency one-on-ones, and that's typically where members of kind of our tag team of BSIT, of grants functional leads, of GMO are getting together with an agency and walking through the specific challenges that they're facing and addressing it right there, or figuring out what the plan is to address that. And really excited to note, thanks to the work of Chief Floyd and her team, we actually had for the first time this year, since I've been with the city, a citywide CFA training. So a training for the agencies on the schedule of expenditures for federal awards. And typically that's been an area where in the past we struggled a little as a city. And sometimes it was because the agency's so busy they can't get the information back. Sometimes it was they had difficulty locating the information. But we had a very well-attended session, and it's actually prompted us to think of a curriculum throughout the year, just looking at audit information, communicating with auditors, how to respond to requests for information. So we're very excited about that. And then next slide, thank you. Policies and procedures. So just to note, the good thing about the city is that we do have a framework. There are existing in the AM manual grants policies, and they do cover really the full life cycle of the grant, from grant management, identification, to grant award, to documentation. But what we see moving towards the future is how do these policies need to be updated and then incorporated into our daily practice, and updated not just in terms of the changes to Workday, which is important, but also in terms of new grant guidance, best practices, but also what lessons have we learned and how do we want to change it. So we do have completely revised drafts that we have had extensive input on. We are going back to our grant stakeholders one more time because we want to be sure that, that we get it right. And with that, I think I will turn it back to the director to talk about some of the changes we've made in the budget process.
Thank you so much, Deputy Mercedes. So as our technology and policies become more mature, it's allowing us to take down some temporary, what I'd call scaffolding measures that were there to provide kind of temporary assistance and move the city to a stronger final configuration. One of those scaffolds was the practice of allowing what are known as unallocated grant funding in agency budgets. That was used to speed up the grant approval process, but it placed the city at some financial risk and created more work for everyone on the back end. So we're now far enough along that starting with the fiscal year 25 planning process, we've reset the field. We've asked every agency to rebuild their grant budgets from the ground, and agencies have done tremendous work on this, and it is ensuring that budgets are accurate, as well as building in controls that will ultimately protect taxpayer dollars. Next slide. And finally, we're reimagining the grants management team. Going forward, their duties are going to include oversight, training, and budget development. On oversight, they'll monitor citywide revenue receipts, grant drawdowns, and spending patterns. They'll provide guidance to agency grant managers about best practices. They'll develop quarterly projections, much like what we currently do through the BBMR team with the general fund. They'll develop a final fiscal year closeout report on grant performance. They'll monitor grant closeout processes in Workday to ensure that once a grant's been ended, all the work tags and account numbers have been closed out, and develop guidance for agency staff, human resources, and BBMR on how to abolish or move positions that are no longer needed once a grant has been closed. Next slide. On training, they'll develop a training manual for new agency grant managers, conduct quarterly training for agency grant managers to ensure that all agencies are current and aligned, conduct any other required ad hoc training, provide guidance and oversight to agency staff for developing my apologies. And then finally, on budget, they'll provide guidance and oversight to agency staff for developing grant budgets as part of BBMR's annual budget process. Ensure that appropriated grant budgets are consistent with awards and within policy parameters. Provide guidance for agencies on how to handle differences in state and federal fiscal years versus the city's fiscal year. Serve as a grant expert at agency budget hearings and testify on grant policy procedure questions, and initiate supplemental appropriation requests to City Council for any new grant that is accepted mid-year and is not part of the annual budget. This is a lot of work, but it's work that is well needed, and we are finally in a place to resource it and set it up. We're creating a new leadership position to spearhead this work, which I'm happy to say was just posted this morning, and we'll continue growing and building on our expertise to help all agencies with their grants.
All right, we'll now turn it over to the agencies to provide very brief overviews of the major grants in their portfolios, and we'll start with the Health Department.
Good afternoon. The Health Department is about 80% grant funded, which represents roughly just over $200 million in funding. What we'd like to do this afternoon is walk you through the breakdown of our funding by type, as well as the service categories. We'd like to walk you through our three-phase process briefly of the grants management process. And then finally, we'd like to walk you through some of the changes that we're making to improve that process and improve our accountability. So I'm going to pass it over to our Chief Operating Officer and Chief of Staff, Kelly.
Hello, everyone. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, historically, the Health Department has been over 80% grant funded, around 80%. In fiscal year '24, we have 213 grants totaling over $200 million. That's from 18 different funders. We have 11 different reporting periods, grant cycles with those grants, and we process around 250 contracts annually in the last few years. Next slide, please. Just looking at the breakdown by fund type, so that's federal, state, and private funds, we have, of those 213 grants, 136 of those, or $122 million, are from the federal government, 72 totaling over $81 million are from the state, and then 5 of them, over around $661,000, are from private sources. So that's the breakdown on that. Next slide, please. And just want to show, looking at our grants per service category. So we have grants in almost all of our service categories in the Health Department's budget. This table just shows how many grants are in each service category and the total amount of funding from those in those service categories. So you can see that the categories with the highest number of grants, that includes maternal and child health, HIV treatment services, advocacy for seniors, community services for seniors, and emergency services. Next slide, please. Oops, excuse me. So now I just want to quickly review our grants management process at the Health Department. We break it down into 3 phases. The first being the pre-award phase, and the first step in that is identifying the grant. Our programs are responsible for finding funding opportunities. They'll search the federal and state philanthropic grant opportunities that are available. Partners will send us opportunities as well. The next step is to review the RFA and see if we're eligible and if we're a good fit for the funding. And then at that point, they have to seek leadership approval. And so for us, we have what's called a grants go, no-go document, and they will complete that document, get that approved by their assistant commissioner, deputy commissioner, and then if it gets approved from there, it gets approved by myself, the chief of finance, and the commissioner of health. The go, no-go considers things like the term and the amount of the funding, the alignment with priorities, capacity to implement, sustainability, and measurable outcomes. And then the third step in this initial phase is to apply for the grant. So the program will prepare the grant application, they'll prepare the budget with support from their accountant, and then this application gets routed through that same approval process as previously, and they submit the application. So moving on to the award phase. So if we are awarded, we'll receive something called a notice of award from the awarding entity, sometimes called notice of grant award, has various names, but we'll receive some sort of notification. And then we request the work tags for that from Department of Finance. Then our notice of award goes through the BOE approval process. And once that is finally approved, we can begin the work, meaning we can start spending on that, we can hire, we can develop contracts and things like that. The last phase, the post-award phase, has a variety of steps. Our programs will monitor the progress throughout the grant period. If applicable, they'll meet with subrecipients to monitor progress. They meet regularly with the grantors to monitor progress and compliance, and the grantors typically offer support and oversight to us. Depending on the funding requirements, reporting will be due throughout the grant period, specific to that notice of award. So we'll do financial reporting, program reporting. That's usually done quarterly or monthly, and there's always an annual financial report too. So at the end of a grant period, a few things can happen. So funding may be reoccurring, or it can get extended for an additional period of time. We may need to submit a new application at that point. The grant could end, but we could receive authority to do carryover. Or the funding would end, in which case, we make sure everything is closed out and we submit the final financial report. All right, so that's the process. So I just want to talk a little bit about, the next slide I'm going to talk about what improvements we've made, but some opportunities that we want to work on in this upcoming year is working to finalize and strengthen all of our standard operating procedures that relate to grants management. We need to further improve our tracking system for the notices of award and contracts, really to help better automate and take some time off of that process. We want to move to multi-year contracts whenever possible to kind of lighten the load. to take less time in processing, offer continued training to staff and start training our vendors as well. And another goal is to increase the number of MBE WBE businesses that are receiving contracts from us. In my last slide, next slide. So some recent improvements that we've made over the last year. I touched on some of these, but we actually developed our tracking system for notices of award approval and contracts. We documented a clear standard operating procedure for processing these. We also reviewed that internally as well as with other agencies to help identify areas that we could improve efficiencies. We've had conversations with the law department and other agencies around doing multi-year contracts. And we've actually streamlined and updated our budget template, which was a big issue for us, but we now have a streamlined template that's made things a lot easier. We have brought on additional staffing for contracts, audits, and compliance. We developed a single point of entry email address for people to submit their contracts and notices of award. We've started trainings for staff again. Those stopped during COVID. And we've drafted standard operating procedures for subrecipient monitoring. And that ends that for us. Thank you.
All right, we can move to the next slide, DHCD.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alice Kennedy, Housing Commissioner. Just a little bit of background on the grants at the Department of Housing and Community Development. We generally have 7 grants that comprise of our Community Development Block Grant Program, our Home program, which is also federal through HUD, our lead hazard reduction demonstration grants, weatherization, and we have 2 additional. We have a weatherization demonstration grant with HUD as well as an older adult home modification grant, and then summer food as well. Some of these vary in terms of the makeup of the grant, so like summer food varies. It isn't an exact amount. It basically is they will cover every single meal we can serve. And it covers, that covers staff, et cetera. And then same thing with weatherization, it's an up to amount. It isn't like a guaranteed amount, and those basically are reoccurring on yearly or multi-year basis with the state as well. We've done over the last 2 years some significant kind of updates on the CDBG as it relates to sub-recipients in terms of just changing a couple of things that have helped us streamline the timing on those. So the first was switching the budget template from something that was archaic and hard for subrecipients to understand. I kept actually asking them, why, my staff, like, why is it so hard for the subrecipients? They keep saying the budget is an issue, and then I saw the budget form, and I'm like, why, just why? Why? The CAO and I can commiserate sometimes on the reasons we just ask why. And then it's about how to change it and make it better for everybody, including the subrecipients and our staff, to create those efficiencies. So we updated the budget template. We worked through a streamlined process as it related to approval of the subrecipient grants and moving that. And then also we have CDBG also covers MOUs that we execute with agency partners as well. In terms of, so we've had some great improvements there. We've also had some improvements in working with Department of Finance, Bureau of Procurement on some issues that were with some contractors and renewal of contracts, but we've gotten that working along, which is great as it relates to like lead hazard reduction, et cetera. And I'd say one of the real big things I wanted to highlight here as well is that CDBG actually is in our 50th year. So Baltimore is actually the oldest kind of jurisdiction receiving the CDBG funds. It's highlighted and is typically a model jurisdiction that they look to. And so we're really excited to be going into that 50th year of Community Development Block Grant with the changes that we've made there. And we're looking to work with the Department of Finance on some other improvements we can make as it relates to kind of advanced vouchering versus reimbursable vouchering at the federal level, not at the city level. Thank you.
Next slide, MOHS.
Good morning, Ernestina Simmons, Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. So thank you all for giving me the opportunity just to present our process here for MOHS. So overall, we administer about 150 contracts a year through subrecipients and contractors For the sake of this presentation, we're really going to just stick with subrecipients, and we're not going to talk about the process for emergency contracts. Next slide. Our agency has two major funding streams that we really take a look at, which is the COC project. We hear a lot about it in terms of it aims to provide permanent supportive housing services, rapid rehousing, youth homelessness demonstration projects are really what's in that portfolio. And then a consolidated funding application is just the city's system of who we're identifying and prioritizing for funding opportunities throughout the city. Next. We've listed what is the approximate funding levels for each of these funding categories. So ESG is emergency shelter grants. Homeless solution programs has to do with, again, housing, rapid rehousing. Supportive services is a large component of that, as well as how we fund emergency shelters. The Department of Social Services is a grant that simply funds family shelter. Housing opportunities for people with AIDS, that project provides rental assistance largely not only in Baltimore City, but in also other jurisdictions as well. And then the Department of Health and State Special Funds, another Ryan White project. And general funds is how we really put a large component in our emergency shelter system, supportive services only projects, and continuum of care. Again, that's everything that MOHS serves in terms of permanent housing, rapid rehousing, and et cetera. Next. We wanted to walk you all through what does this contracting process look like as a whole. We've been able to talk about when an award is given, but this process looks at what happens once MOHS has identified a subrecipient and an award is issued. So the first step for us is after we've received an award letter from rather it's HUD, rather it's HOPWell, rather it's HSP, we issue conditional awards to our subrecipients. The second step of that is the award is really a notification of a dollar amount, but the second step of that looks like us going back to our subrecipients, allowing them to update their budgets, update their work plans, updating their scopes. So on average, it takes us about 3 weeks to a month to get that documentation back from our subrecipients. The third step to that is we issue work tags. The reason that this takes about 4 to 8 weeks is because when you receive your initial conditional award, it does not include the dollar amounts for each of your subrecipients. So that process on average takes about 4 to 8 weeks before we can initiate the work tags in the system as the Department of Finance kind of laid out for this group. The fourth step is once we receive back the scope of work from the project recipients, they update their work, we do the work tags, it has to now go through our program compliance team and our fiscal review. That process takes about 10 to 15 days. We're looking at not only your budget, but your program, your services, your eligible line items in alignment with what the funder is going to fund for that service. So the process really is not just about the dollars, it's about the compliance that's associated with what you've asked for. And so the next 5, 6, and 7 really just has to do with looking at it from a compliance lens through each of these different processes. And then a final step for us is at number 8, we submit it into BOE, but that process can take about 1 to 2 months for us. But once BOE even approves the project, we now have to go back to our project recipients, and they now need to have their contracts executed. They have to now finalize their items and their grants and their agreements. And so overall, this process can take us at least 3 to 6 months is really what this timeline for this process could take. Next slide. Once grants are awarded, though, our recipients are expected to start on time. So despite the fact that we looked and you're able to see that it can take a long time for our recipients to be paid, the expectation is you start your service delivery with the contract start date. And so as a result, our program compliance team is responsible for doing an onboarding with each of the recipients after 20 days that they are awarded the contract. Oftentimes, we will be able to see that an organization had a scope of work, but when it comes back, some things might change. Their budget might have been asked to change the scope of work. They might have applied for line items that were not eligible line items. And so this process is really built in for us to talk about what are the performance metrics associated with the grants that they've received. And then our teams we process subrecipient payments on the 20th of each month. But again, for our providers in their onboarding, we talk about it's due on the 8th of the month to allow our team some time to process your expenditures. And then it's ongoing communication with our providers surrounding expenditure reports. We've built in quarterly check-ins with our subrecipients, and it's not really just about the expenditures, it's also about the compliance of their programs, whether or not they're meeting their targets. And that's also when we talk about timely submissions of expenditures. Oftentimes we hear about payment challenges, but when expenditures are submitted late, it delays the entire process for our fiscal and compliance team. And that is a challenge that we have across the board. The next step that we've newly implemented is a mid-project evaluation. This tool has been created for us to not only assess spending, but we check in with our providers on a quarterly and a semi-annual basis now. And the reason for that, not only for the compliance lens, but we're also looking at underperforming and underspending at the mid-project point. What this allows us to do is assess your spending and determine if we need to add additional households onto your project, look at the utilization of your projects, but it gives us an entryway of really taking an assessment on each individually projects, their performance, so that we just know how we can utilize resources a little bit more efficiently, but at the same time, it's also targeted to provide more technical assistance when needed for our subrecipients. As an agency, we are required by most of our grants to do an annual monitoring for our subrecipients. And again, the idea is that we're building off, so annual monitoring is not a surprise for our subrecipients. We spend time with you monthly, we spend time with you quarterly, so when you get to the annual monitoring, it's not a surprise, but however, it's far more in depth than the other evaluations. And finally, we are required to submit APRs to our federal, state, and local jurisdictions within 90 days of the grant closing time period. Our subrecipients are required to submit it to us within 45 days, but we're required to submit it within 90 to the funder. Next slide. Since October, we focused on enhancing our service delivery in areas of compliance, subrecipient payments, and implementing tools that enables us to effectively serve Baltimore City. Some of what we've been able to do so far is we work really closely with HUD technical assistance to create tools, standard operating procedures, manuals, but not only to create the tools, you have to be intentional about you're introducing something new to your staff and your community. So what we've been able to do is create learning opportunities and sessions with our HUD technical assistants as we're implementing these practices within our program compliance team. We've also hired 5 additional program compliance officers. The goal here is really to reduce portfolio sizes, but also, as you could see in the previous slide, we have a lot more connection with our providers at this point. So you have to reduce the portfolio sizes to be able to do that. We've also added on an additional member to our finance team. We actually added on 2 additional members of our finance team, a CPA accountant as well as another junior accountant to assist in this process. And a final item that we've implemented since October is really just a dashboard. And this dashboard allows me and our organization to see the compliance portfolio percentages for each of those that are on our teams. But in addition, we've shared this tracking mechanism with our providers so that they're understanding how we are looking at their portfolio, some of the things that we're doing that can help not only them perform, but also keep us accountable to what we're looking at and what we're looking from their portfolios on. Next slide. A large area of focus for us had to do with subrecipient payments, as I stated. This is really just reflective of where our agency was in September, October, and November. What you could clearly see is in the month of November, we really focused on back payments for subrecipients that had an executed contract. And so we increased our payout by 159% for those that was owed in October. In the second slide, the second graph is really just an indicator of who has an executed contract versus those that does not have an executed contract. The process that it takes for us to remit payment really is dependent upon an executed contract. So if it's not executed, we are not able to remit payment to providers. And so you're able to just to see a reflection of what does that look like in that impact that it can have on providers. You are expected to start on time. However, our process does not allow us to pay you on time. Next slide. And as our final slide, just to give a general update on where we are in terms of HUD field office, we've been working with them and meet with them on a bi-weekly basis. And the purpose of that is really just to talk about where MOHS is in terms of overall grant compliance, some of the things that we're building just to make our office just serve well is really how I'm going to categorize it. And those meetings are going according to the plan. On November the 6th, we were approved to resubmit our fiscal year 2020 vouchers. What that looks like for us is HUD has given us the opportunity to resubmit expenses that the city had already paid out. And so right now we're pending reimbursement from HUD in over $6 million of us being able to recapture dollars that the city had spent, but we were not able to seek reimbursement for. And our final item for HUD is, I think, just a collection of the work we've been able to put in over the last couple of months. Our projects were funded by $29 million for us to fund 43 projects in the upcoming year. Thank you.
All right, and we have one last agency. I know this has been a lengthy presentation, but wanted to make sure that we did a deep dive on each of the requested agencies. So I'll turn it over to the Recovery Office to close this out.
Thank you again. I'm Shamaya Kearney. I'm the Chief Recovery Officer for the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. The Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs is responsible for administering the $641 million that the city received in state and local recovery fund, which is a portion of the American Rescue Plan Act. The Recovery Office has a dedicated fund that is solely for the $641 million that we received, and the entire allocation was appropriated to our office as a part of the operating fund, but we also have a sub-fund or a capital component as well. City agencies and sub-recipients are allowed to charge against our work tags that are centrally managed by the Recovery Office. And as of January 2024, there are 113 projects that this office manages using that $641 million across city agencies, quasi-government agencies, and our nonprofit partners, which includes some of the agencies that are sitting with me today and on a variety of topics that include broadband, recreation and parks, health, food insecurity, city infrastructure, if you name it, we're funding it. Next slide, please. So Director Simmons laid out a lot of information regarding how we get to a grant agreement, meaning all the work that is done with regard to identifying program scope, working through budgets, working through line items with eligible expenses. So while all of that is not represented here, this is more of an overview of our grant agreement components. Every city agency, nonprofit, or quasi-government agency that receives ARPA funds are required to enter into a grant agreement with the Recovery Office. Those components include the term start and end dates, the budget, performance measures, points of contact, requirements, and assurances. That's generally reasons why we might be able to terminate, or insurance limits. And in addition to that, our invoicing and disbursement schedule, which really mostly applies to our nonprofits and quasi-government agencies. And there are a host of things that we look at when we determine when to disperse against the invoicing schedule. Next slide. So this is a high-level overview of the workflow for city agency payments, just to demonstrate how many entities are involved in payments and what our controls are for those payments. So starting off with creating the grant work tag and moving down into how we submit transactions within Workday. Our project managers and accountants, some of the work that they do outside of Workday to compare information from the budgets that are included in the grant agreement to what's being submitted in our official system of record in Workday. The things that our city agencies have to do, as well as accounts payable, and then finally getting to completing the transactions where we finally do make a payment. And then the right side just again reflects some of our internal controls around ensuring that these are eligible uses, that they align with the budget line items that were included in the grant agreement and things of that nature. Next slide. So the workflow differs a little bit for our nonprofits. Still with Workday as our system of record, we create a work tag and then a supplier contract the nonprofit organizations submit an invoice to our office, and again, we will make payment on that invoice based on a couple of different things that we review. We look at the rate of spend, we look at the disbursement schedule, that's a part of the grant agreement. We look at if there are any items that we determined are ineligible when they provide their expense report to us on a monthly basis. So there's a kind of a lot that happens before we actually get to making payment for the invoice. Next slide. So in addition to the workflows for payment, we also have payroll reviews. There are a number of positions that are funded through ARPA. And so to ensure that all of those positions are actually charged to the right accounts, there is a process that we have in place to review the payroll expense ledger. And then we share the list of ARPA-funded positions with city agencies to make sure that all of the positions that are funded by ARPA are showing up in the correct place and being charged to the correct accounts. If we identify that there are any positions that are not being charged correctly to ARPA, then we work with the city agency to correct those errors and make sure that they're accurately reflected against ARPA accounts. And then we repeat that process every month to make sure that all of the ARPA-funded positions are being charged to the correct accounts. Next slide. So this is a very high-level overview of our subrecipient monitoring process. I would proudly say that our office averages about 75 meetings a month with all of our subrecipients. That includes city agencies, that includes quasi-government agencies, as well as our nonprofit funding recipients. Our subrecipient monitoring is based on a risk assessment, which is a number of questions that we provide to our funded entities based on how they respond to that risk assessment determines whether they are low, medium, or high risk. Based on whether they are low, medium, or high risk determines the cadence in which we monitor. If you are medium or high risk, you provide expenditure reports as well as performance data to us on a monthly basis. If you are low risk, then you provide that data to us on a quarterly basis. In addition to that, the project managers and recovery office meet with every funding entity based on that cadence, either quarterly or monthly. As a part of those conversations, we are reviewing the data that's being provided to us on their performance measures that were included as a part of their grant agreement. We're looking for anomalies in data and making sure that the data makes sense to us. If it doesn't, we're asking questions to understand what the discrepancies might be. In addition to that, we're looking at the financials to make sure that the financials make sense and align with the budget items that are included in the detailed budgets that are a part of the grant agreement. In addition to that, we have project milestone reports, which give us more narrative information than what the data sometimes will show us. And so we want to make sure that we understand if projects are on track towards completion, especially because we have statutory deadlines around obligation and expenditures. In addition to that, based on the data that we provide, we may do some additional ad hoc monitoring. We may do some expenditure testing if we have concerns about some of the financial data that we're receiving. We may do on-site visits. We have gone to some of our subrecipients and looked at data, looked at construction if they're doing capital projects, just to make sure that everything that's being reported to us also looks and feels right. And in addition to that, we also review single audit reviews so that we understand what some of the risk might be with their compliance and making sure that they've addressed that either through a corrective action plan that they've already submitted or one that they submit to us based on findings that we've identified through our subrecipient monitoring. Next slide, please. So in the last slide, just quickly, some of the improvements that we were asked to identify is the centralized management of all of our ARPA funds, we believe improves accountability and transparency and assists in the consistency of reporting to our federal regulators. I'm also proud to have led mandatory training for our funding recipients around the Code of Federal Regulations and compliance for federal grants management to help minimize some of our compliance risk. In addition to that, we've developed a job aid site that is available to any of our funding recipients that provides tools as well as guidance documents on how to adhere to some of the federal compliance rules. We recognize that not all of our subrecipients are familiar with the Code of Federal Regulation, and so we have provided detailed documentation and recorded trainings and things of that nature to assist our subrecipients to ensure that they're successful in the delivery of their programs and services. Lastly, this isn't specific to the Recovery Office, but I think opportunities more generally for grants management are around developing policies and processes for our capital grant accounting. In addition to that, I'm documenting all of our grants management processes to include infographics and process maps. So not necessarily just the job aids that are available in Workday, but other supplemental documentation to help with our training our staff. And in addition to that, just developing training for the full grant lifecycle for all grants management staff. And while what you've heard here today is some different approaches to grants management, there are still some very fundamental staples that we all have to do, and so we should have training that aligns with that. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you so much, Madam CAO, and to the rest of the team. I know I was truly pleased of the level of detail and information that you guys were able to cover with us today. I have a couple of questions, and then we're going to start on questions around the council. I think the question is to you, Mr. CFO, and Madam CAO, chime in as need be, but what's the benefit of, I guess, the strategy of us having this decentralized grant administrative process? You know, I guess through your past experience in other places and kind of best practices, it seems like, you know, from like a standard operating procedure, and I would probably exclude the Mayor's Office of Recovery. Recovery is kind of a grant shop in itself. But for like all the other ones, so say for like the CDBG money in housing, or say like Ryan White in health, or say like the chronic homeless money that we get, like this money that we repeatedly get in, and they have very stringent federal regulations. What's the strategy of having that decentralized versus like the grant administrators being inside of the finance shop?
Oh, can I want to start off, and then, Michael, I'll turn it over to you. So thank you for bringing up the Recovery Office and just kind of the strategy and the infrastructure that we built there. So one of the things that this administration has done is pilot, essentially, with the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs, as well as with the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development, actually lifting up the grants management process and having that be at the executive level so that we can have more insight and more oversight to that grants process. Now, what I've seen in other jurisdictions, I've seen where other jurisdictions have a chief of grants management or like a grants management officer that is either in the city administrator's office or within the Department of Finance or on the budget team, but that person serves as the citywide or enterprise-wide grants officer for that entire jurisdiction. Now, the benefit of having CDBG and housing and HOPWA and MOHS is because of the subject matter expertise, right? And so none of the grants that we talked about today are alike. They all are different. They have different reporting deadlines, different requirements, and many of them take technical expertise from leaders in the health department or housing, et cetera, in order to fully implement. But what we are hoping to build is a model very similar to what we've piloted and tested with the Recovery Office and infrastructure development in the CFO shop, which he talked a little bit about how we just posted that new grants manager position. We have a centralized grants management office that's currently in the finance department. And so now what we're going to do is we're actually going to flip how they do their work on its head, right? And very similar to the approach in MOID and the Recovery Office, they're now going to have portfolios of work so that they actually build the expertise in housing, in health, and in all of the grants areas, and they're able to really provide that deeper support, technical assistance, and oversight. But I'll turn it over to Chief Moisieff to discuss more. Moxton, excuse me.
Well, thank you so much. And the CAO really covered a lot of what I want to talk about. I did just want to say I truly appreciate the question because in a lot of jurisdictions that I've seen, there's sometimes a hybrid approach, like the kind of approach that we currently have, and I can explain why a jurisdiction might have one, and it's exactly as the CAO said. It's because there is so much subject matter expertise that is required to apply for a grant, to administer a grant. That is a threshold to overcome, but it's not overcomable, or it's not impossible to overcome it to centralize. There are definitely advantages to centralizing, and the ARPA office and what they've been able to achieve in the last couple of years shows that it is possible, and it puts us in a much stronger position to safeguard the dollars that come to the city. So we are working towards that centralization model. It is a worthwhile goal. It takes work, but we're moving in that direction.
I guess the point I was trying to get to, Madam CEO and Mr. CFO, was not to take away the subject matter expertise of the grant administrators in each individual department, but more so look at those grant administrators being co-located in those departments, but reporting up to finance. And I say that because, it's been times where, I've reached out to finance, assuming that finance would know the answer right away, and they're like, no, go to housing or go to Mayor's Office of Homeless Services for those answers. So I guess when I say centralized, meaning not all sitting in the same building, but centralized from an organizational structure perspective, because now the accountability is to finance and not necessarily to the agency that is administering the grant.
Yep. So I appreciate that, and I've seen it done a couple of ways. I've seen some grant administrators report to finance. I think more broadly, I've seen it to where it is kind of the agency reporting. What I hope that we're able to do, I want to say, is it 9 FTEs we currently have in the centralized grants management function? So Michael has in the CFO's office his centralized grants management team. And so using your example, now if you call finance, you'll be able to reach one of the grants managers who will have a portfolio of agencies, so they would be able to actually provide that assistance and support because they're now going to have deeper kind of oversight. Right now, what they do is more along policy and updating the grants manual, right? So it's a higher level functioning instead of actually getting into the nuts and bolts of grants management, which in the recovery office, they actually have project managers that work with each of the agencies, so they can tell you they can tell you about just as much as anyone in the agency about those projects because they are working alongside the agency staff in implementing those projects. So we're now moving to this portfolio base, which isn't 100% to what you're suggesting, but moves us light years ahead of where we currently are.
Now, with those positions, are they new positions?
No, so there's
Which is
one,
repurposed.
well, Michael, you can speak to the positions.
Absolutely. So there's a handful of existing positions, and we are redefining the duties of the staff that's there. There is one new position that we're creating, and that is a leadership position.
Yeah.
We've basically shifted around some of our FTEs because this is such a big undertaking to kind of change how we do things. But yeah, it's one new leadership position. The rest we're drawing on the existing team.
Got it, thank you. So I guess moving forward, hopefully a couple months or so, and as you ramp up, the idea is the council can just go to finance to kind of better understand where we are from a grants perspective, and it'll be that team that'll work directly with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would be remiss if we didn't mention Workday and how this new technology will also allow us to have more oversight and can quickly respond and identify where certain grants are.
Got it. Now, I know this is a question that's kind of subjective, but I guess ideally, when should a grant be paid? And I would assume that it depends on the type of grant, but I'm only speaking from the standpoint of like Board of Estimates. There's not, a month that doesn't go by. We have a Board of Estimates meeting where there's a grant that it's already kind of been out there. We should have been approved. So how do we get ahead of that? I'm pretty sure Workday is kind of part of that. But like theoretically, when should a grant be paid? And then based off of that, do we keep like some quantitative or qualitative like data on us paying grants on time, some tracker?
Yep. So, yes, so I'm going to walk through the process as it currently stands. And you saw a little bit of it when MOHS kind of outlined their
That was actually really good, that workflow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we should have done one kind of for enterprise-wide. But you see Justin Elsas from the Office of Performance and Innovation is here because he's actually been working closely with this team, and he co-leads the GCC, the Grant Coordinating Committee, with Michael and I. But essentially, as the process works right now, it can take 3 months or more for a grant to just be accepted. So let's say the city receives a grant from HUD. We have to go through kind of the internal agency process and then prepare that grant to be received by the Board of Estimates. Now, I will note that the board actually doesn't have any power to change any of the requirements that are in the grant, but it still has to go through legal review, it has to go through fiscal review, it has to go through pre-audits and audits, and that process can take 3 months. Now, when you receive that grant, there's a date in that grant that says when the grant and the work will begin. So that work might begin on 7/1, but we might not have that item through the Board of Estimates until, September, right? So that means that subrecipient has to begin doing the work, although they cannot get paid for it until that agreement is fully executed. Even after we accept the grant, we still have to take that same grant through in order to allocate the funds to the subrecipient as well. And so that's one of the improvements that we talked about with the CDBG grant. We were able to work with the Comptroller's office. So now, instead of sending each individual CDBG subrecipient award to the board, we actually note it when we accept the CDBG grant. We note who the subrecipients are for the board. So now that saves us, 2 to 3 months, Alice, Commissioner Kennedy can specify. So we've been able to streamline that process for DHCD, and we're working on doing the same for BCHD and essentially the entire city enterprise. The last part of the process, we actually then have to send that grant to the federal government or the state government, because now it's signed by the board and the board clerk, and we still need it to get signed by the state in order for it to be a fully executed agreement. And depending on their processes, that can take 2 months, 3 months, or what have you. So now you can see how a subrecipient is on the ground doing work in a community and doesn't get paid for 6 months or 7 months because we don't have a fully executed agreement. And so some of the things that we are looking at to improve that process is looking at noting the subrecipients if we know who they are when we accept the grant award. And then, a thing that we've been talking about with the Comptroller's office as well as with Aaron on your team is actually just noting the grant, right? We have no authority to change any of the requirements of the grant. So do we need to actually send the grant through pre-audits in that entire BOE process? Or can we just post it online on the BOE website? And if we want to pull it for a BOE meeting, pull it and present on it instead of sending the agencies through a 2 and 3 month long process just to receive the grant.
Now, the legal check and all that would still have to take place prior to.
So the legal check, as you saw with the MOHS director's slide, it happens prior to. So we're actually duplicating a number of processes that we really don't need to do. So we would still have the legal requirements. Before it even gets to the board, we have to agree to, our legal teams have to already agree to the terms of the grant before it even gets to the board, that board process. So that's what we're looking to streamline.
No, we're going to jump into other questions. Okay. Just one quick question. Regarding the MOHS workflow chart, is that standardized throughout? That was really helpful, like going through bucket by bucket, or was that specific to MOHS?
No, that's specific to MOHS and some of their grants. I think if we were to outline the process chart for each agency, I think we can, do a high-level enterprise-wide, this is generally what occurs. Yeah. There might be nuances for particular grants, but we could supply that for the board if you're interested.
Yeah, no, I think it would be good for the council, for particularly the larger agencies, to just kind of mimic what the Homeless Services kind of did, because that workflow, I don't know, for the rest of the council, was really helpful for me to see each bucket and the expected timeline it take to complete.
Yeah, thank you.
At this time, we're going to turn over questions. Chairman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you guys for the very helpful presentation. It's very thorough, and I think helped me wrap my head around generally how the city manages everything. I had, a lot of similar thoughts to the president around the centralized versus decentralized sort of methods with which we deal with today. And I had a couple of questions. So I was really curious, I got to thinking about some of the problems we've heard about in the past with like money we didn't spend or money we had to return. Do we track that centrally, or is that tracked with the agencies?
So, so through the Grants Management Coordinating Committee, we now have kind of an early warning kind of tracker, if you will, where we can look at spend down and the like. I think a couple things. So one on MOHS, just to clarify on the HUD issue in particular, we actually put the money on the street. We actually paid the funding to the subrecipients up front. And so it was the drawdown that we were behind. And that drawdown, and the director can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the drawdown has to occur 30 days following the end of the project. So there are all these requirements around the drawdown. And so we've actually been able to work with HUD because of the fact that we did do the work and expended the money to work with them to start to submit those invoices and to recoup that money. But what I will say is that, that the work with HUD has come a long way, but it's also been the impetus in us ensuring that we have kind of this centralized insight into what occurs. But on the accounting side, that's where the finance department and the budget team, where they work with the agencies around accounting, because of course we have to account for the funds if we don't actually recoup them.
Yeah, that was exactly. I noticed that in the presentation that it seems we got our money back, which is great. And my thought here was, what do we learn from that mistake, and how do we make sure we don't let it happen again? And my thought was, there should be, maybe not to the degree that a grants manager in an agency would be hands-on, but some sort of high-level early indicator. Given now we've centralized a lot of the system through Workday, that would allow us to look at, I don't know, monthly, quarterly, whatever it is, and finance to say, hey, look, we have these grants coming up. We need to make sure we get it reimbursed. How are you guys doing MOHS or health or HCD?
So OPI, so I will tell you, it is a massive data dump that we went through, that our chief data officer led us through that process. And we have this massive spreadsheet that we're turning into a dashboard or like an early warning, not system, but just indicators, so that, it pops up red if there hasn't been a drawdown for a grant that we know we only have a year for and we're already 6 months in. So we're not fully there yet. Right now it's this massive tracker, but the next phase of it is to turn it into that early warning type of dashboard that you're speaking of.
I see, so that'll be pulled into OPI and the staff.
So OPI will develop it in partnership with, is working on it in partnership with the finance office and my team.
That's right, exactly. And I will just add that all of this data was not available before. This is one of the things we're really excited about, because this was one of the findings in the single audit, probably the most critical one, of, hey, the city really has to go to a bunch of different sources to figure out what grants are at risk. So we have the data. It's a ton of work, but we're making our way through to organize it, and that's what we're building, not just the analysis, but this new team around is responding to that data.
That's great. And then my next question is kind of two questions, but they kind of answer each other. And that is, how do we make sure that expenditures adhere to the intention of the grant, so that we don't find ourselves in situations where we have to pay back because technically we spent grant funds on something that the grant was not intended for? And along with that, the sort of flip side, how often, or how do we make sure that general funds are not being spent on what we already have grant funds to spend money on?
So that's a really good question. And I'll take it in two parts. So the first part of the question really relies on strong internal controls as well as subrecipient monitoring. And you heard that throughout the presentation. And if you've read our single audit, we've had a number of findings for years on end around subrecipient monitoring. But through subrecipient monitoring, that's where we actually go out and we test what our subrecipients are doing, right? So we can do expenditure testing, we can, dig deep into their programmatic implementation, right? We go back and we're able to compare that against invoices that have been submitted to us. And the ARPA team talked in depth about how they conduct subrecipient monitoring, and we actually are using their subrecipient monitoring tool across the city enterprise. And I think we just finalized our subrecipient monitoring policy through the Department of Finance. So that's where we would be able to really start to dig into the expenditure data, and expenditure compliance is by doing that subrecipient monitoring and testing of expenditures. The second part of the question, I think I just lost it.
It was about general funds.
General funds, yes. So this has actually been something that I've been digging deeper into, and it's more so around what a grant management practice called time and effort, for example. So what we've been looking at as we are facing a structural balance is, how can we leverage and maximize the grant funding that we have to free up our general fund dollars. And so one of the areas where I think there's a lot of opportunity is around time and effort, which is really a form of accounting where we have people that might be doing the work that can be charged to the grant, but instead of charging them to the grant, we charge them to the general fund. But the reason that we charge them to the general fund is it's easier. You actually have to do monthly time and effort certifications if you attempt to charge a portion of a position to the grant. And so we generally don't do much of that across the enterprise, but it's an area of opportunity that could potentially free up millions of dollars if we were to do that level of work. But it also could potentially put us at risk if we don't do the accounting well. So that's, as we mature, those are some of the things that we'll be looking at.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful, and I hope you realize that those two questions tied to my first, and making sure that we don't send money back or not expend all of our funds, because if we're thinking about that general fund piece, if we're leaving money on the table, it's often because we're using the general fund to execute some part of the program. So I appreciate the answers. Thank you.
Next up, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President, and again, thank you for this presentation. It's just very important and answered a lot of questions that I didn't really know the answers to. But I guess I just have one question, and that has to do with the overall training. You're doing training, which is fantastic and good, and it's a need, but there's training for the managers, there's training for the recipients that receive the grants, there's, you have to report to the state, you have to report to the feds. Does the federal government have a specific contact for training? Are you getting certifications? Is this training going to help bring in new employees for the city from some of these outside programs? All that's kind of in play together, and each of the aspects of training are different. Can you just kind of share your vision and how you're doing all this different type of training?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start, and I'll allow the director to jump in. So, I want to be transparent. I think we are now implementing more robust training. I would say, I can imagine that during the pandemic, a lot of the training around grants management and other kind of protocols, was not fully implemented. And so one of the things through the Grants Management Coordinating Committee that we identified identified is that, all grants managers are not created equal. And so, we, through our monthly convenings, have talked about opportunities to, do some in-person trainings as well as to create on-demand training as well, to create more process maps. The other thing that complicates this and complicates our training is the implementation of Workday. While Workday has, helped us move leaps and bounds as far as, having a lot of the data in a centralized location, we still have to train our staff on how to use Workday, and the idea that we have these work tags that each of the agencies talked about. These are all new things for our compliance officers and our grants managers in the agencies, and so that's why we're looking to, continue to implement a more robust training program. To answer your question about the federal government, MOHS spoke specifically about their partnership with the HUD field office. So most of the federal government agencies have these field offices, and those there's usually a staff or one or two people at that office that is dedicated to the city of Baltimore, and they will work directly with our teams. And so MOHS, for example, they work with they get technical assistance training from the HUD field office. The health department also gets support from HRSA in their field office, for example. And so those are the experts at the federal level, but who operate regionally and who are able to dig deep with us on the implementation of some of these grants, and they can answer the more technical aspects of some of the questions that we have. So for those grants, we actually do have an entry point into the federal government. ARPA, for example, and even infrastructure is slightly different. It's through the Department of Treasury. So all of the recovery dollars, CARES Act dollars were implemented slightly different. But some of the older grants, HOPWA, CDBG, most of those you have regional field offices that we're able to work with on training and technical assistance.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam VP. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks all of you for your great presentations. I have very specific questions about CDBG and the Catalyst grants. I noted that there was a press release from the Comptroller's Office and DHCD in March of last year, and it sounds like those changes that were announced are starting to be implemented, if not currently. So what is the, I'm still hearing complaints about delays in those contracts. I'm definitely hearing about delays in Catalyst, and Catalyst is capital funding. It's ours, so it's not like we have to receive from somewhere else and then go back out. I guess I just want to understand what the changes that you've put in place and what is coming, so that we can get money on the street is basically what we're trying to do.
So I'm going to separate that into two different questions and look at those. So based on the work that we did in partnership with the Comptroller's Office last year, everything is actually running as it should be. Those immediate items, the first annual action plan went, and then the second annual action plan actually went, and we started to be able to execute those agreements immediately. So the contracts, as long as the biggest delay we had actually was getting the contract documents from the subrecipients so that we could take them as a batch. And we used some peer pressure with the subrecipients to help be able to do that and get it all together and batch. There is a slight delay right now on some payments. That's because we found that it missed multiple different layers within DHCD as well as finance and BBMR. A number is off in the work tag, so we're actually sending that back to BOE right now to get fixed so that we can get some of the most recent ones paid and finally executed. But otherwise, it is everything we said from that standpoint is implemented, and the contracts are being signed. So the first batch, the contracts went through, the BOE memo went through, and I was signing contracts a day later, 2 days later.
Was that for year 49 or for year 50?
we're not even in year 50 yet.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
So we're-
that was for 48 and 49.
48
and
and 49.
49 is the one that we just need to send the fix through, which we're working out right now on getting that fix on the BOE on the BOE agenda to do that minor fix. But 48 and 49 were all done like that, and the application actually just closed this morning for 50, and we worked with teams, and we've been putting in additional kind of subrecipient measures as well, just in terms of timely payment and so forth. So if subrecipients haven't submitted their quarterly reports, they will not be awarded a grant. And so we've been giving them time to understand some of the new kind of components that are in place as well that we're putting in there. To then answer the second part of the question on CCG, I'd have to get you a report on those. The capital grants, we don't issue the capital grants until the project is ready to go. So we make a lot of awards under CCG capital, but the project isn't ready or they're finalizing their capital stack, and it's really worked out with the grantee in terms of what they want to do, when they want to do it, and how they're going to do it, and where the money is going into the deal. So on the capital, it isn't necessarily we're not doing anything timely. Most of it is we're just waiting until the project is ready and then moving that through in terms of executing the agreement per work with the subrecipients. On the operating side, we actually switched and did the same process with the most recent round of operating grants for CCG and used the same exact process that we've used for CDBG. So those went to the board, the first round of operating a couple months ago, and those were executed in that same manner in terms of it goes to the board, we do a blanket approval, and then those are being signed and executed. So that is now under the new process as well for operating. So capital, it's a process. We have some money that we've awarded under CCG 3 years ago, and we're still just working with the subrecipient as they finalize their capital stack.
Right, so how long does it take once that you've gotten assurance that, the shovels are going in the ground, everything is working out for them to be able to access the money?
Mostly it depends on them completing and getting us the documents, and then their review of the contract, executing that contract, taking it to the board, and then moving it through. So, and the BOE process has actually, I think, gotten a lot better. So the whole submission process and so forth, if we have all of the paperwork ahead and we've already sent it to pre-audits for review, you could get on the board of it agenda, the BOE agenda as fast as 45 days, which if you had asked me about this question 5 or 6 years ago, I would tell you it takes us 6 to 8 months to get something on the board of it, estimates agenda. So it depends on just what the subgrantee on the capital side has ready to go. They also have to make sure the big thing on the capital as well is that they have the thresholds that they have to meet for minority and women development. Insurance ends up holding it up. So it is really kind of a timeline of when they have all of their documents and they're also in agreement, and their lawyers have looked at the contract, and then it kind of is able to move its way through. So once they have all that, we should be, moving. And it also depends on if there's been an agreement on if any portion of that is upfront, because not all of them have upfront portions.
Right.
Some do, some don't, some are strictly reimbursable. So it also depends on, they'll get paid once they submit the items under the budget that are slated in that draw to get paid.
Thank you. Related to that, I guess, CAO, you sort of alluded to this, but it sounds like those kind of blanket approvals for, or what the commissioner was calling a blanket approval is really that, all the contracts are the same except for maybe the dollar amount and the work, right? And so that they're then put in a package for the BOE to look at, rather than doing them all the same legal and auditing approach and all of the same, you're just looking at the amount and the work, basically. Is that correct?
Yes. So so this is still fairly preliminary. So we piloted and tested this out with the CDBG grants. And then again, the comptroller started meeting with the health department to help them with their grants. But through this work group with Aaron from the council president's office, as well as the folks from the comptroller's office, I've been kind of surfacing this idea of, do we actually even need to formally send grants when we receive them through the BOE process? Can we just put them on the BOE website so that they're a part of the agenda, but they don't go through kind of the more extensive review process? And then we're able to pull them off the agenda and as a non-routine item if there is interest by one of the BOE members. So we're still early stages and working through kind of the mechanics of how we would implement something like that. And then of course we need to have a legal opinion to ensure that we can do something like that. But yeah, we're having those conversations.
Well, that's, you just mentioned the grant receiving, but I'm talking about the grant getting out the door.
The subrecipient?
So the subrecipient
Yeah, so
piece.
right now, so with CDBG, as the commissioner mentioned, right now we're able to note all of the subrecipients on the grant whenever we send it through the BOE process, instead of sending each individual subrecipient contract through the Board of Estimates process. So we're currently doing that.
Right, I guess I'm asking about the fact that, do they have to go through an extent, it sounds
Oh,
like,
you
do
mean
they have to
the
go
review.
through the extensive overview of every single contract? I mean, there's the monitoring piece from the performance side. That's different than what I'm saying. I mean, because it seems to me, I haven't been doing it, but every contract is the same, except for the amount and the work that has to be done.
So the contract is the template, which we've had the contract, the CDBG template contract has been the CDBG template contract. We've had that in place
for a long
for
time.
years. The part that still goes through the pre-audits component is each individual budget for each subrecipient.
That makes sense.
So we send each individual budget for the subgrantee that's listed through the pre-audits process, and that is what is reviewed. But then the contract template is what's basically approved. And one of the things that worked as well is that there are other agreements that legally have been able to state through some of our other lending agreements and so forth that this agreement can be executed by the housing commissioner at this time. So the board is giving that authority to execute the final signature process. So it's a hybrid. It's not every single contract and every single piece. It's every single budget that goes through.
Right, the budget and the work
pre-audits.
plan, so
And
that-
they go in batches. Like we've worked with the office, so like we're sending, a batch of 10, and then they've asked for another batch of 10, so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I have an MOHS question, but I can yield at the moment.
No, keep going.
Okay. So, Director, it sounds like you've done yeoman's job of really working to get those back payments taken care of, and we appreciate it. I think we just got one recently that I think was taken care of. And so I guess the question ends up being, there's what we're getting complaints about and what we see in terms of, the landlord's not getting paid, et cetera. But I'm very concerned about, if payments are getting on time to, other recipients so that we can make sure that people are housed and stay housed. And so the conflict with the landlords that we saw is part of that. But then there's also, payments to the hotels where people are staying, or payments to, other types of providers that are doing the work. And so I just want to get a sense of, and again, that sort of workflow was great. And as the president said, I think we probably want to see one for each. But we just don't want to have those kinds of crises that we had to deal with again.
Thank you for the question. I think for us, it's really about the system itself that we're looking to improve, right? So standardized processing is really going to be what this is about for us. I think one of the things that's been highlighted, though, is we've received some inquiries for grants that are not executed, which really MOHS has no capacity to pay those landlords if it's not executed. So part of that looks like, how do we improve this process on the front side to give us the ability to be able to pay the landlords? And everything else that we're trying to do is really about streamlining, being able to assess where are these backlogs coming from us, but a lot of it has to do with the BOE process, executed contracts. And on the other side, Workday has been wonderful, but it's also new for some providers. So a lot of the inquiries that's come through that has to do with our HOPWA side and our HAP contracts, they're really landlords that are not processing, that are not putting in their invoices properly in the right way, or they're setting up their payment information and leaving out some EFT information. So it's several barriers that we've seen. And so part of our process is not just us understanding what's going wrong in our office, but it's also working with our providers to see how can we provide a little bit more support to them as well. So hopefully you'll continue to see the effort and the improvements that we're making. And just to segue, I appreciate the level of patience that this group has shown for our office. And over the last couple of weeks, even when the inquiries are coming, they're coming through with the level of help me understand the process, which I completely appreciate. And so thank you all.
Thank you.
No, we appreciate your leadership, and Madam CAO. I think that I can't speak for the whole council. I can speak for myself. Council can back me up, but I think the level of leadership and stick-to-itiveness and responsiveness from HOHS is probably the best that I've seen since I've worked in city government. So I want to commend that. I know you guys had a lot to clean up, and it's hard work, right? It's not easy work. And then once you clean it up, it's still hard work moving forward. So I just want to, trump in, any positivity that you received from the council thus far about the level of effort, input, and responsiveness from you guys.
Thank you.
With that, Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm going to go a bit deeper than my colleagues because of grant management experience. So what have I experienced from the issues that we troubleshoot through my office? Two things. One was we had a grant that was submitted that was signed by BOE but was never uploaded, so procurement couldn't pay someone. Are we making sure that we're monitoring how people are inputting data? Because junk in, junk out, which means that someone not get paid because someone didn't follow through the entire process. So I just want to make sure that while we're doing grant management, we're thinking about systems control on our part as well for staff, but also what are we going to do for the people that you're hiring? Because I think that the level of technical assistance our agencies needs more positions. I'm just being transparent. And how did you come up with that number of personnel that you're hiring? Because ideally, I've seen city schools has a grant management office of over 30 people, right? To manage a large portion across 150 schools, plus internal divisions and offices, and almost thousands of grants. So how do you perceive us managing? Because as we were listening, I total almost over 800 contracts that we are issuing every year for just grants by itself.
Absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate the question, and I'll start by saying that grant management isn't just the grant management team. I think you heard me talk a little earlier about accounting, and we are adding people to the accounting team specifically to help with the technical side of reconciliation. We will talk a lot more in the future about procurement, where we're adding support to make sure that people kind of go through the process. The grant management team right now is going through the biggest expansion in its history. I don't know if that is the end. It's just the beginning, but we are in a place for the first time where we can actually assist agencies because we have the data, and so we're throwing resources at it. I will absolutely keep the council up to date through our efforts as we expand this team. And the point is well taken that just a few positions might not be the end. But like I said, I will really emphasize that it's the beginning, but also that a lot of work is already currently happening to try to assist agencies. Deputy Mercedes, do you have anything to add just on kind of the shepherding of the work process?
So I'll just speak a little, maybe on a micro level. Thank you. I'll just speak a little maybe on the micro level in terms of how we're transitioning. And I want to thank the CAO for her leadership, right? So looking across the city. So there are going to be, for example, data and reporting and analysis that the grants management team will need to do on a citywide basis. And some of that we'll expect that they'll build up that capacity in the office. But until that point, short term, we've been working hand in hand with OPI on very specific projects to try to maximize what we're able to do. To speak to the director's point, I do think, long term, it may look different. And the things that we want that office to do may look different. But I'm very pleased to get to this point and have the support of the administration and really citywide, the agencies for recognizing this is a thing that we should do. Having been here for a little bit, I can say that for years there was probably some resistance and some thought that maybe we didn't quite need to have that centralized oversight, speaking back like many administrations. And so to have that will now to do it and understanding that it is a short-term plan. We are the finance department, so of course we want to ensure, so that Bob doesn't get mad at us, that we're going through that budget process and we're being thoughtful about the resources we need and then planning out how that might look in future years.
Yep. And can I just add to that? So I want to underscore Workday here. And so while Workday will help to streamline some of those processes, it is not going to eliminate human error, right? And so I think through our monthly grants coordinating committee meeting, which everyone in this room attends, I mean, it's like 40 plus people that are in these conversations where we're able to lift up issues like that, whether it's a Workday issue and a technical issue or just a trend that we're seeing in a department so that we can try to catch some of those issues. But again, until the entire enterprise is in our subrecipients are comfortable with Workday. We likely will still have hiccups here and there, but now we're able to nimbly and quickly catch those issues and try to fix them before they have a longer term, deeper impact.
That's helpful, but didn't answer the question. I'm just going to be transparent. I just want to know how we got to the number of positions and for the level of lift that we're trying to estimate, because I'm hearing you, but I'm also wanting a specific answer for the number of positions, because I don't see that GMO is actually here, right? So I want to know how many people do you currently have, how many people you think you need by the fiscal year, because that's helpful to me as a person who thinks about systems, because what I found, and not to pick on MOHS, was systems management issues, right? There were people who didn't have access to get reimbursements. There was a person from procurement that did not upload a contract from BOE that stopped the payment, right? These are all issues that, case in point, we missed payments to firefighters because someone at the fire department did not input someone's social security number, right? So simple to put into Workday or bring it over. So I just want to make sure, it's great that we have dashboards, but the people inputting that human data have to be trained. And that is my biggest issue in city government, is that the people that we expect to do the right job at the right time, we need to have more, and I hate to say this, span of control over our staff. Because a lot of the issues that we have are staff-related and systems issues. I hear that you're hiring more people. I want to know the number of people and why, because I can tell you that you can have an analyst, but that analyst has to do VLOOKUPs. That analyst has to make sure that you have agnostic data pools that go to speak to multiple systems. We're just finally getting our financial services turned over to Workday, right? that's fine and all, but there's still sometimes, if I make a payment for my water bill, it still is not tracked until 48 hours later in the actual finance system because DPW can't tell, right? These are small things that we have not gotten that far, whereas we have single sign-on now through all of our other devices, but I should be able to see my water bill. I can see all these things down, and I think this is a conversation that I have more in depth, especially with BSID and GMO here as well, because this is I hear you in terms of people, but the technology is great, but I need people to be trained to use it correctly and that there be accountability for using it correctly, because it took 8 months for someone to get paid because a contract wasn't uploaded.
Yep, thank you for the question. And I'll have the director speak to the specific number of positions. But to speak to the broader issues, I think we went in pretty significant detail around some of the training that we have been implementing. So through the Grants Coordinating Committee, we identified training to be an area of opportunity for us. And so we've been working in partnership with the CFO's office as well as the GMO to do some more of those citywide trainings. I think for GMO specifically, one, we're talking a lot about how we're going to reimagine a team. And so I think, having this conversation with that team not here is probably a bit more appropriate. And so the work to reform GMO is ongoing. Their roles are going to be completely different than what they are currently doing. And so before we go out and post for, 10 more positions in GMO, I think we, one, need to identify a grants management, a chief of grants management that can lead some of those reform efforts. You'll hear us talk about procurement reform, and the biggest first step with procurement reform was hiring a chief procurement officer who could identify some of those best practices and lead that reform work. And so for us, that's what we're doing with the GMO, is now we have a senior position that we will bring on board. That person will come in and help us assess our system to determine if we need additional positions, which, straight facing $100+ million deficit, right? We have to be thoughtful and do this in a phased approach. But I hear you about some of the, more technical challenges. What I will offer is that we have to be thoughtful in how we roll out new technology in the city of Baltimore. I was at a budget community session over the weekend, and a community member said, I love the fact that you are doing all this innovation, but the people that I work with still need to come inside the office to pay their water bill. And don't do this so much that you get beyond what the needs of the community are, right? And so we have to think about the same with our workforce as well. Workday was a large undertaking, and all of our workforce, they're not created equal. And so that's why we're doing this more detailed training in Workday to train the users of that system. That's why we're doing more recorded and on-demand training as well, doing more process maps, for example, and again, having this kind of more senior leadership team to convene to talk about ways that we can support our staff. But I want the director to talk specifically about the numbers that you asked.
Well, thank you so much. And I think the city administrator really got to the thrust of what my answer is going to be. And I want to be as transparent as possible about our thinking here. In another area, such as procurement, which we're going to talk about soon, we went through a process where we first brought in new leadership, reimagined what we were doing, and then created a plan. And I can tell you exactly how many people we need and why it's that number and not one more or one less. In accounting, which was an area that was more developed and more mature, we did go through that exercise with Chief Floyd, and I touched on it before in the presentation on the area of grants as it intersects with accounting. We are bringing on 2 people, one mid-level and one junior, because basically we need support in the analysis, in going through the pivot tables, and then actually reaching out to agencies and saying, this is what you need to do right now. In grants, what we are doing is brand new and has never been done before. The right way to do it is to start kind of at the core. So start with just an idea and and a leader. So we are currently going through that process. I have seen transformations where that's enough, and I have seen transformations where you need to come back for a lot more. And when we know the answer, we will come back and engage in that discussion. But again, to underscore the CAO's point, what you're seeing today is vastly different from where we were 6 months ago or a year ago with the data tools that we have and with the people that we have today to assist agencies through the process.
Still didn't answer my question. So, so I'm just asking this because my experience in government in managing multi-million-dollar grants, right? Because the question I'm asking this because the next lead question would be, of the grants that we have and know that we have recurring, what type of administrative costs and we share on that grant to pay for the additional staff to have that portfolio, right? Because that's the next question that I was leading to, but we can't even get there because I can't know what the number of positions are, right? Because I can tell you that the health department with its own finance team, I believe they have 6 people right now. If I believe from last budget season, 6 people in the finance department from the health department. I don't know a number. I'm trying to remember the number of your staff, but with those grants, they have administrative costs that you could actually share to actually help manage their portfolio. So my request to the committee, and this is, one, have we identified high level which of the recurring grants that we can use administrative costs to pay for your positions because we have a budget deficit?
So I talked a little bit about time and effort, right? Which is, you know, an accounting tool that we could use that could potentially save the city a lot of money. It also, time and effort, T&E. So essentially, it's where an employee that is spending time on a grant, they just have to track how much time they are spending on the grant in order, monthly or at some regular cadence, in order for that portion of the grant to be charged to that person's salary. I think that becomes a lot more difficult for the GMO than it does for the health department, right? So we can account for exactly how much time a grants manager in the health department is spending on, Ryan White or any number of grants. Now, when it comes to the grants management office, with this new kind of setup, we may be able to do some of those T&E allocations. But what I want to be thoughtful and careful about is we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we're charging positions against the grant and then we're not able to verify the T&E because that person has 10 or 15 grants in their portfolio. So the accounting on it can be more complex for an office like the GMO, but I hear your point and I receive it, that we should be thoughtful about how we can leverage our grant funds to help pay for staff in GMO.
Yeah, because I'm just being transparent from the level of depths I've had with the frustration from MOHS, housing with CBG. They have people dedicated to it. The question is, can those people be detailed to this office because they have that technical expertise? Why build a new ship when there's actually existing actual paddles in place, right? So I'm hearing you, but I'm also thinking of there's been innovative in trying to bring new people, but there's a person who's sat there for 6 years who knows the work, who could be more assistance to that work. And even if you don't do time and effort, because there's other means of getting there, I just think about City Schools, who has just as much as a big budget as we do, who has a team that is nimble enough with 6 budget analysts to do this work for multiple schools, 150 of them if you count them as agencies, right?
Yeah, and so I think a couple things. So we are, I was trying to go back to your analogy here. So we're turning the ship around, right? We're not creating a new ship or building a new ship. What we are doing is taking the positions that currently exist in the GMO, and we're saying, instead of you focusing on, policy, high-level policy, what you are now going to do is you're going to have a portfolio of agencies that you are responsible for working with and monitoring and tracking all of their grants, their expenditures, their awards, and the compliance issues and the like. like, right? So it is giving that team a different remit and responsibility, and it's really structuring them very similarly to the way that we structure the recovery office, which sounds similar to how the school system, for example, might operate as well. So we've been able to test this approach and this structure with the recovery office and with infrastructure development, and that's the approach that we want to employ to our central grants management team. So again, it's not, they will be working with the person, the rower that's in DHCD that's been there for 40 of the 50 years of CDBG to ensure compliance and to work with them on workday issues and to help them implement the corrective action plan that came from their single audit, for example. So we're just changing their roles and responsibilities.
I still didn't get the answer. I'm just going to be transparent with y'all, right?
So if you send it to me in writing,
no,
then,
because
okay.
I'm frustrated, and I'm just going to be frank with you all because I hear new positions. I hear
they're not new positions, though. There's only one position that is new, and that would be the head of grants management. We currently have positions in the GMO. We're changing their remit and what they do day to day. So it's not new positions.
Yeah. Yes and no, because the job and scope and everything's going to change for that whoever is existing in that position. I think new position is like my duties as assigned has now changed, right? That's new position for me because that's a new function as a person, as an employee. I think that like this is more so like a in-person briefing too, because I have more detailed questions that I want to ask that may be uncomfortable for the agent to answer in person because this is dealing with other people's employment, right? But in terms of like the level of detail, I thank you for this, but this could have been a more detailed conversation in terms of where the vision was going. Recovery office does it well. Court things that we know that they need to catch, right? Finance has a lot of bodies that could be reorganized in a way that's different, right? I think that, and I'm pushing this push a little bit more because my issues have come down to capacity and competence. And I think that that is the conversation that we need to have, even if it's not present in this chamber. But this is across the board because there are things that, again, contract not being uploaded, a small thing that cannot, right? Or the fact that like not all of our agencies are consistently using the new online signing process that we have through DocuSign to sign grants, right? They're actually sending physical forms, right? We have to get tighter. And I know that we've gone away from the old system where we used to have physical checks go around with a memo, right? And people are signing, and it gets there. We've gotten away from that. That's another system control. But I think that you inherited something that was not in the best form. I think that the urgency to fix it is important because glaring is MOHS returning a large sum of money. I'm just gonna be transparent, right? Or that I still have people who are saying I still have not received my payment from the city, from other agencies because of a grant. Those are and for me, that's harmful because there are small organizations that it makes or breaks to close them, right? And I think that's why I think this should be a briefing. So my request is a briefing by March 1 with more detailed specifics.
Sure. A couple things. So MOHS did not, just to be very clear, what happened with MOHS is they actually did not draw down on funds. So we actually were able to pay providers. And again, since the director's been here, we've been able to work with HUD to start the process to actually recoup the money that the city had already expended. So I always just want to clarify exactly what happened in the case of MOHS. Now, a couple things. So we've talked a little bit about subrecipients and providers, and especially our grassroots nonprofits, which I hold very dearly. And so there are some very real challenges even in our provider community, right? And so oftentimes it's not, when we implemented Workday, it wasn't just about our own workforce that needed to be trained, our provider community need to be trained, and all of them present with their own, ability to navigate technology as well. And so that's what we are working on, is to work with that provider community to, one, strengthen that community, ensure that they have the capacity to be able to accept and manage state and federal funds, because a lot of our provider community is not fully equipped to be able to do that work. And so, again, this is a multi-pronged process, and while I understand the sense of urgency around procurement reform, system change work does not happen overnight, right? And so what you have seen today in this presentation, one, is a baseline and a reestablishment of what the current baseline is, right? And then us talking about what are some of the more immediate and near-term reforms that we can make while we continue this more difficult and arduous process of systems reform, right? It is not something, that's going to be done in a year or even 3 years, right? When you're reforming an antiquated infrastructure like the one that we're experiencing, and one that people are comfortable navigating, right? Like that's the other part of this when we talk about our workforce. And so happy to engage in a more detailed briefing with the Finance Department, any of the agencies that are present, to talk in detail about some of the specific questions that you have.
And then, really quickly, Mr. President, can you just state the request again?
He wants an individualized briefing, so he can go into more detail associated with the grants management process. I think out of respect, he just wants to ensure that he can have a certain level of discourse and discussion with the administration.
Okay, and that was by March 1st? Okay.
The only other thing, I just have like 2 other quick questions, but I think you had a question earlier that we still have outstanding, and that's if there was any monies that we don't know about as of yet that we have to give back or that we've given back. I think that you asked that earlier, is that right?
Yeah, the question was, how much money did we leave on the table, return, give back, I'd say in like 2022 or 2023, just to like take a look back and see.
Yeah, how much we
often this
didn't draw
happened.
down, for example?
I guess because technically it depends on the funding. Sometimes they give us the funding up front, sometimes
Yeah.
we pay down out of the general fund and they reimburse us. Either way, at the end of the year, what's the delta between the two and how much is that? Yeah.
Got it. Okay. We can pull that. And the team can confirm for me. I am unaware of any money being recaptured, meaning that a grant was given to us and we had
Clawed
to
back or
actually,
something.
like a
Yeah.
clawback, for example. I'm unaware of any clawbacks. Now, what we can look at is drawdowns. So where a grant expired and we weren't able to draw down all the funds from that grant. So we can pull that information and follow up with the committee.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
And just another question, we won't answer it today, but just really looking at the strategy around grant-funded positions, specifically as it relates to ones funded by the American Rescue Plan, when the expectation for the expiration and just the plan out there. So we're going to list it down. Nothing for us to talk about today, but just want to make sure we put that out there.
Yep. So this is the thing that I want to put on the record when it comes to grant-funded positions. When the grant ends, the position should end. That is my general thinking, and I think the city and other organizations, not just us, we have a habit of wanting to continue, to keep the positions on board. But I mean, they are funded for a finite amount of time for a reason. And so my view is not that we're going to absorb all those positions. There are some that we might absorb as a city, and we would look within the city's current vacancies to see where we could absorb some of those positions. But some of the work, the idea was to pilot some of these initiatives, not necessarily to, continue them in perpetuity.
The council agrees, so thank you, Madam CAO. Another just couple quick questions. From a CFA perspective, I know in the last audit, there were like total of 24 items, 18 were due to date. Are we straight with completing the ones that were due to date, do we know? If we don't have the information today, I don't want to put you on the spot, but
So if I could give a brief answer, I can respond to kind of the citywide material weaknesses over grant accounting, and I might pull in Chief Floyd if that would be helpful.
That's fine.
To talk about some of the specific, and you've probably heard me reference them during the presentation, but I can actually go down the list of things that we did to address the material weaknesses that were found.
well, just for the purpose of time, and just I know that I think I counted 24. I think 18 were supposed to be done by, today. So just want to make sure like we're good with those 18 and the tracking of the other 6, we're basically on track to complete those.
Maybe we could address that in writing, because I'm speaking to the material weaknesses in grant accounting that were citywide, but there were program-related individual findings related to specific grants that many of them dealt more with kind of the program compliance issues like record keeping of files or eligibility requirements.
Okay.
So I'd prefer to do those.
So we'll just add that
writings.
to our list, to the administration. From a quarterly perspective, we do great, like with general funds and like updating the council. You know, we always fight over capital. You know, always asking about where we are from a capital snapshot perspective. You know, as we kind of go down this model, we've never gotten anything from like a quarterly update associated with grants and like the snapshot. Is the idea with this new position, is that something that we can expect on a routine basis like we do from a general fund perspective?
That is the idea. We're modeling the position and really the entire function and unit after what we're doing successfully in ARPA, but what we've done for decades successfully with the general fund. So yeah, that's absolutely reasonable.
And we'll eventually get to capital like that as well?
That's the goal.
All right, that's the goal. At this time, are there additional questions or concerns? Seeing and hearing none, this will conclude the legislative oversight hearing, LO 230053, agency briefing on grants management. Thank you so much. Now we're going to just go right into the resolution for 23-0205R. Again, for the folks in the agency that are leaving, for everybody that's leaving real quick, thank you so much for your time. I hope this is as beneficial to you as it's been for the council. You know, the idea is for us, again, to kind of get ahead of some of these like really detailed processes and collaboration and workflows, so it doesn't bog down the budget process. So I truly, truly appreciate your time. Hopefully it was as beneficial to you as it was to the council today. We're going to jump into, again, 23-0205R, investigative hearing procurement of Baltimore City for the purpose of inviting the Bureau of Procurement, the Department of Finance, and the Bureau of Budget and Management Research to brief the City Council on procurement practices in Baltimore City with regard to their impact on effectiveness of the city's procurement process, including a discussion on potential problems identified within these processes and solutions to improve city bidding and procurement. On behalf of the administration, I believe we go right back to Madam CAO.
Yep. Faith Leach, Chief Administrative Officer.
Christopher Lundy, Chief of the Mayor's Office of Small and Minority Business Advocacy and Development.
Michael Moxton, Chief Financial Officer and Director of the Department of Finance.
Adam Manny, Chief Procurement Officer.
Ioana Mositas, Deputy Director of Finance.
I will kick us off. Good afternoon. I am Faith Leach, Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Baltimore. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the administration's efforts to reform the city's antiquated procurement system. I want to take a moment of privilege, and it started down this line of discussion earlier, but I want to take a moment of privilege to discuss systems change or systems thinking, which is going to be key to our reform efforts. System thinking is this interdisciplinary approach to understanding how different parts of systems relate to each other, how systems work and evolve over time, and what outcomes they produce. Systems change is an application of that thinking to real-world situations. At its core, systems thinking requires a shift in mindset from linear thinking to embracing complexity and interconnectedness. Systems change requires working across organizational boundaries and interdisciplinary action. Systems don't change overnight. Instead, changing systems requires a shift in an organization's culture and mindset and how we approach problems. Today, you will hear about the technical aspects of reforming our procurement system from our finance and procurement team, but as a reminder, we are reforming a decades-old system. Baltimore, like jurisdictions across the country, is working to reform the procurement process to use it as a strategic tool to advance our city's equity goals and improve the delivery of services for city residents. In furtherance of the city's reform efforts, Baltimore was selected to receive technical assistance from Bloomberg/Harvard University and their city leadership program, Leading City Procurement Reform, which supports cities' efforts to transform their procurement process to be efficient, inviting, and transparent. The Department of Finance team, including members from the Bureau of Procurement, attended the program and joined the Harvard University Government Performance Lab Procurement Excellence Network, alongside dozens of cities working to transform their procurement systems. Much of our reform efforts were derived from this partnership with Bloomberg and Harvard University, as well as technical consultants. In addition to support from Bloomberg/Harvard and our technical consultants, my office established a monthly procurement stat meeting, a biweekly check-in with procurement and operational business units to expedite mission-critical contracts, worked with the Office of Performance and Innovation to create a procurement tracker. A snapshot of that tracker or dashboard is provided at the end of this deck. In addition, we worked in partnership with the BOE to reform the emergency procurement approval and notification process to the board. Now, I'm going to turn it over to the team where they will discuss both the short and long-term procurement reform efforts and highlight the progress we are already making to establish a best-in-class procurement system right here in Baltimore. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our Chief Procurement Officer, Adam Manny. Adam is a top-tier procurement professional, and we were lucky to recruit him from Prince William County, Virginia. One of the most significant steps we have taken to reform our system is recruiting Adam to lead this critical work. I'll now turn it over to our Finance and Procurement team to walk through the deck.
Thank you so much, City Administrator. I'm going to just say a few words at the top, and then I will pass it off to our procurement chief. But first, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to talk about procurement, because procurement is so important, especially when it's working well. Because when procurement works well, it's a source of innovation and opportunity. You can use it to run government better. You can use it to uplift local businesses, to help the city's economy. When it isn't working well, it's a source of friction and frustration. And unfortunately, for a long time, procurement in the city of Baltimore has been more in the latter category. And the problem predates everyone in this room. This is an almost 300-year-old city, and many of our policies and regulations and ways of doing things haven't been updated since the 1970s, if not earlier. They were written at a time when technology looked fundamentally different, or the policies were patched together during times of crisis. Mayor Scott witnessed this firsthand throughout his career as a city employee, a council member, and council president. People tried to do their best to deliver services and help citizens, including people in the Bureau of Procurement, but our own rules and systems tied a hand behind our back. Since the start of the administration, the mayor has been focused on fixing these wrongs and building procurement in Baltimore back to this gold standard of ethics, efficiency, and equity. And so to that end, Mayor Scott directed my department to conduct a comprehensive citywide procurement needs assessment. We work both with existing city staff and the outside experts that the city administrator just referred to look at our code, our policies, our systems, our administrative processes, our technology tools, and our overall capacity. And I want to just take a moment here to recognize that when we talk about capacity, it's not just numbers on a page. It is people. It's people going above and beyond to get it done and make things work with whatever tools they're given. So I'd like to take my own moment of privilege here for a second. Our team got a very sudden reminder recently of just how human we all are when we lost one of our own. William Ward, a procurement analyst who had been with us for a number of years, tragically passed away just 10 days ago. He was one of these people. He liked to help, and in that process, he touched a lot of lives, and he improved a lot of lives. So we'll be having a service for him later this weekend. If anybody wants more information, please get in touch, and just thank you for giving me this moment to honor his memory. So as we look to the future, we're charged with finding a better way to meet the needs of our partner agencies, our own staff, the suppliers we rely on for critical goods and services, and of course, the people that we ultimately serve. And even as we were going through this assessment, we knew we had to fill some of these critical positions. As the city administrator just said, none was more important than CPO, which had been vacant for several years. We engaged in a nationwide search, which culminated in the hiring of Mr. Manny just several months ago. And together, he, Deputy Moisides, and I continue to prioritize resources and make additional key hires. All the while, Mr. Manny got up to speed on the assessment, contributed his own extensive professional knowledge, and developed a concrete implementation plan. I'll now turn it over to Adam to go over the highlights of that very exciting plan and the future of procurement in the city of Baltimore.
Thank you, CFO Moxon, and thank you, CAO Leach, for those kind words. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The plan really breaks down into these 4 key areas of contract administration, organizational design, workforce development, and stakeholder support. Really, this breaks down to people, processes, policies, and technology. And in the Mayor Scott's procurement transformation plan, there are 22 separate recommendations, both of long-term and short-term, to help us achieve that. If we can go to the next slide, please. So our short-term objectives, first is hiring. As it says, is the Bureau of Procurement for a number of years, before most of the people in this room, has had the staff has really been decimated. The loss of Mr. Ward hurts even more as we go forward. We are in the process of hiring. I'm happy to say that since I've started, we have added 5 positions, and we are looking to continue to increase that, to continue this workload. We are looking to restructure how the Bureau is set up. Right now, the Bureau, when a requisition comes in through Workday, it's ad hoc. So a department, an agency puts the requisition in. It then needs to be reviewed by a procurement manager who has to then take a look at an Excel spreadsheet to see what the workload is like and manually assign that to either a contract specialist 2 or a contract specialist 1. We are looking to move towards a team-based method where a team of procurement officers will support a stable of different departments and agencies. This does a couple of different things. It gives the department and agencies knowing exactly who's supporting them, and it also gives the procurement officers the opportunity to learn about the needs of those departments so that we can start moving from being reactive to a proactive stance. Standardized training. When I've come here, what we have are a few procurement officers and buyers. And buyers are outdated. We really need procurement officers. And we are working with our staff, reviewing the training that they've had. We have requested and we're working to make sure that everybody, once they meet the criteria, will be certified through the UPPC, the Universal Public Procurement Council, and we are asking them to become certified public purchasing buyers or certified public purchasing officers. I'm happy to say that one of our procurement managers recently took the exam and passed, and she now has the certification of CPPO. Course offerings. One of the things that was brought to my attention is that the staff itself needs training, but we in the Bureau of Procurement need to reach out to our business partners internally and externally and provide them training. The first training sessions that happy to say is I have already had 4 training sessions on specifications and scope. The first one back in January, we had over 60 people take it, and then certain departments that couldn't make that training, I have been going out to and providing that training either in person or via Teams either via Teams. We are working on a new training to be both live and broadcast in the beginning of March on cooperative procurements. And we are working on modules for on-demand training, the first one being the principles of procurement, which will be available through Workday, and we are targeting April for the release of that first module, followed up by 2 other modules. And then last but not least, the stakeholder support. It can't be, the changes can't be just from procurement, it has to be across the organization. The big one there is rewriting the procurement regulations with input from all people. The procurement regulations will not be what I'd like to call credenza-ware, where you write them, you put them in a binder, you stick them on your shelf, and they gather dust. No, this is going to be the how do we do business internally, how do we do business externally. They'll be posted to an external website so everybody can see how we're going to do business, and it'll be a living, breathing document that will change as we go forward. If we can go to the next slide, please. Some long-term objectives. We are working with our business partners with Workday and Accenture to implement the strategic sourcing module. This module allows us to do everything within the system. It provides a much better audit purpose, but it allows us to create the solicitation, receive the responses to the solicitation digitally. Right now, it's a manual process going to the comptroller's office. Take those solicitations and get them out to our selection committee members so that they can score it within the system, and then come back, make the award, publish the award, get it over to the BOE for approval, and then the goal will be then to publish all of the documents on a forward-facing website. This Workday Strategic Sourcing, this project has been put on hold for 30 days through the month of February. Workday is working on a major upgrade and release, and so we don't want to waste time while they're working on this. We want to wait for the release to come out so we can see what we're really dealing with, and we'll pick it back up. Our goal is to have this up and running 100% by first quarter of fiscal 25 in July. Additional staffing and classification modifications, like I mentioned, we have buyers. We are transitioning to procurement officers who understand the entire procurement life cycle, who then will be able to add value not only to the departments, but at the end of the day to the citizens which those departments support and go forward. And that is a huge undertaking, and it is well worth the time and energy as we go through it. We are looking to bring on a contract administrations team. One of the things that I heard over again as we were talking about grants is getting the contracts into the system at the correct time. We are looking to bring on more people to help do that, to make sure that they are input into Workday, that we are recognizing when a contract is coming to an end. We've created a 120-day alert now, where we are receiving information from our partners in BSID who have helped with an Excel spreadsheet that tells us when contracts are coming up. It just came out again today. It does go out to the agency financial officers, and my instruction to my staff was review this, and now we need to start working with the departments so that we can move to a proactive stance. Is there another renewal term? If there is, let's get working on it. If there's not a renewal term, are we working with the department to get a solicitation in place, or do they not need the goods and services? So we are working on training that. Additional external reforms, as you can see here, are changes to the charter. It's very difficult to make reform and change if it requires us to go back and make charter changes. The recodification of the procurement regulations, like I said, it needs to be a living, breathing document that explains in layman's terms and other terms what we do, why we do it, and that people understand the rules that they're playing with internally and externally. The bolded one is threshold updates, and I will bring that up on a later slide, and that really is increasing the amount of the thresholds that trigger our formal and our informal processes. The contract renewal process, which I mentioned, P-card usage. One of the positions we are looking to bring on are P-card professionals. There are professionals in procurement card. We're looking to bring on a procurement card manager, administrator, and analyst to revamp the program. This is an amazing tool that we are not maximizing that can really add value to not the Bureau of Procurement, but to the entire organization, the city, and the citizens. We are looking to bring on newer procurement methods and contracting methods, such as IDIQ contracts, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts. An example of this might be with a Granger or a staffing contract. We know we need the services, we just don't know how many we need and when we want to do it. And for those contracts and others, we will look to be moving, instead of tying funds to the contract itself, but to tie funds to the purchase order. So this way, if the contract will never run out of money, but then when it's tied to the purchase order, it's then tied directly to a department's budget. If a department wants to open something up for $1 million, they need $1 million in their budget. If they don't have it, we got to change it. And that should also help us with other items that are going on. And the last is the bringing on job order contracting, JOC contracting. This is currently being used by the state. This is a construction contracting method. It's not for new construction, but it is for repair and revitalization. It allows us to work through a third-party group. There are 15 different general contractors located within the city of Baltimore who qualify for this from the state contract. What it does is it allows us a much faster turnaround to get people out and going. And this will be a huge help for DPW, Recreation and Parks, and others. Next slide, please. So currently, as I mentioned on our thresholds, those thresholds are decades old. And I'd like to preface this saying is that when we're making a request for higher thresholds, we're not just making thresholds for asking you to increase the thresholds for today, but also for the future, for down the line. Currently, at a $5,000 limit, this is a small purchase. It's done by getting one quote and moving forward, and the formal procurement is at $50,000. And these contracts require Board of Estimate approvals. They go through it, and I will mention at this time, as we continue to train up, in the previous past for the last several years, there were 3 people on the Bureau staff who could do formal procurements. Each one of those people have anywhere between 75 to 90 formal procurements at any given time. That number doesn't change, because when they finished one, 2 more would take their place. And as we have staffed up, we are looking to remove them and give them some relief. And moving to the teams-based method will help that even more. Again, we'd like to update the current procurement thresholds to reflect the current market, align with our peers, and this will also help us with streamlining the process. This does require a 2/3 approval from the City Council. We would like to, anything less than $10,000, we'd like to move it to a small purchase, and we would like the limit of $250,000 for formal procurements. That being said, between $10,000 and $250,000, there are other checks and balances that will go in. Some of them will be delegating some authority down to the departments to go out and get 3 quotes. And then there's an informal procurement process that we would go to where the departments would create they'd create the scope of work or the specifications. That would flow into the procurement department. We would do our work, and the award would be made and published on a website. As CAO Leach said, with grants, then once it's published, if the BOE would like to pull it out and have a discussion about it, we could do that. We could change terms in our solicitations to state that this is being awarded, but if the BOE pulls it, then everything's put on done. We would get legal involved. It would just be changing the language in our solicitation. These thresholds would help us delegate more procurement authority to the agencies. We would still maintain the SM bed standards and approvals. We are actually looking to strengthen that to help while we're doing that, where with the 3 quotes or the informal, where the requirement would be is we have to use somebody from the SM bed list. We have to reach out to them to make sure that they have an opportunity as we're growing. To create new incentives to consider and cultivate SM bad suppliers. This could be based upon an RFP by giving certain percentage points if they hit the goals set by SM bad and how we move forward. I've been working with Director Lundy on this, and we chat pretty frequently about it. Retaining transparency about everything. One of the things I mentioned is a forward-facing website, and that is something that I know is important to myself, CAO Leach, the CFO, and of course Mayor Scott, is we want everything done where it's transparent and put out on the internet. So when somebody calls and says, can I see this contract, the answer is you don't need to. It's on the internet. You can look it up with a searchable database with all the contractual information there. Of course, if anything is considered proprietary and confidential that meets the law, we would redact that information from that. And of course, as we move through this, the Bureau of Procurement is still, a purchase order is required as we do it. The purchase order would be that notice to proceed. The Board of Estimates gives the approval, approves everything, and then once we issue that purchase order encumbering those funds, that would be the notice to proceed to our business partners so that they know that we are there and we are ready to work with them. Our dashboard, this is from the great people from CAO leaches as they've been putting through. We've been working with them. This just gives you some idea of the dollar value and the amount of workload that's been going on. This is working with OPI, and I have to say they are a wonderful business partner. They are really helping us as we go through this, gather the data, find the data, and they will be helping us create new KPIs as we move forward through the procurement transformation. Next slide, please. And there you have it. Our goal, like I said, is to prioritize our ethics, our efficiency, and our equity, which will then end up with a greater value to the organization and the citizens we serve.
Is that it? Oh, perfect. Thank you so much again for the presentation. Just to jump right into it, I guess regarding the website that we're talking about, is that work underway to stand up that website?
Yes, so the comptroller's office, prior to even starting, or not even starting, but starting some of the implementation discussions, they started building a searchable BOE website or database, if you will. I think during our last call, they told us that it would be ready in a month or so. And so what we are working through now is, one, ensuring that we understand any concerns that you might have or concerns that the comptroller might have, and then working through how we can leverage that website in order to address some of those concerns. So, for example, the way that we are thinking about operationalizing the thresholds is that we would post grants on that BOE website. Anybody coming to that website, for example, would be able to type in or just use that search engine to pull up a grant or pull up a contract that might be under the threshold. So again, the comptroller's office is already building it out, and it's really up to us to kind of work through kind of the logic behind the website, if you will, and how it will be operationalized.
I guess some of the functional issues that we've seen with BOE and identifying items that didn't make it to the BOE, how do we ensure that we're cleaning that up on the front end to kind of go down this pathway of increasing the thresholds?
Do you mean, for example, the emergency procurements or unauthorized procurements?
Yeah, really the unauthorized, because the emergencies we're going to automatically see still, but it's really the unauthorized procurements that would be.
Yeah, so I think and again, we can work through all of this logic together. I started a weekly meeting with your team as well as with the comptroller's office to talk through some of these nuances. And so with the unauthorized, I think we would still send those to the board. Okay. Because my understanding, the idea is we want to limit or eliminate the number of unauthorized procurements. Totally. I was actually looking at one today that was $8,000, and it's related to restroom facilities at a yard, one of the DOT yards. And my first inclination was, well, one, why wasn't this done through an emergency? And two, why didn't we put it on the P card, which we had that discussion at one of the last BOE meetings. And so, again, it is trying to get down into our agencies, especially the large ones like DOT and DPW, to train them on when they should be using the emergency process as well as using the P card, because the P card could eliminate that from being an unauthorized procurement, for example. But for now, unauthorized procurements would still go before the board and be on the non-routine.
The next up is, I guess, protests. Do we have a procedure? Have you guys started thinking about the protest process?
So I think what we've talked about is, so if we post an item that is under $250,000 or under whatever the threshold is on the web, that we would allow for 10 days. So I think we would use the current BOE agenda process to publish that item, and we would probably do some sort of sort to show, here are the items that are going through the normal process versus ones that are under the threshold. And we would allow for anyone who wants to protest something that is under the threshold to, through a board member, pull that item for the next BOE agenda. So they would have about 10 days, I think, to pull a protest.
Once it's posted on that website?
Once it's posted on the site.
Got you. Will they be notified that the grant was awarded?
I'm sorry, sir. Can you repeat that?
So would we have a bid that's under the threshold? Would all members know that a grant is been awarded or being awarded so they would know to go try to protest? How does that work out in that process?
I can't speak about a grant, but in procurement, we
I'm
could-
sorry, not a grant, but an actual
We
bid
do,
contract.
we can issue what's called a notice of intent to award, which is we put out saying is that we've gone through the process of the informal process, and the intent is to award to X company for X dollar value for X years. This then starts the protest period. You have to then put in your protest. If no protests come in, then the contract would become official with intent after those 10-day period.
So that's part of this plan?
Yes, sir.
Got it, perfect. And then I have a couple more questions, but we're gonna move on from me. Just the last thing is, I know that you guys provided some comparative analysis on the thresholds, like comparing Baltimore to other places. I think many were like states, interested in seeing if like-sized cities with like-sized budgets kind of have those same thresholds. So something we can work offline, but I just want to say for the record.
Yes, sir, we can get that.
Are there any questions from Chairman Conway?
Thank you, Mr. President. And I appreciate you pulling together this meeting. And I know this has been an issue as soon as I came into council. I was really focused on and, had been really looking forward to some progress here. We all know that the procurement system has been is notoriously slow and has notoriously had issues. So I'm happy to see that there's a comprehensive, both short-term and long-term plan being pulled together. And I think everybody here is looking forward to being a partner in that effort. If there is legislation to be passed, we are eager to do it. Part of my considerations for pulling this together was just thinking about the percentage of the budget that goes into the procurement system. So out of the operating budget, it's nearly 25% of the entire budget. And then all of the capital budget goes through the system. And so when you're looking at it in total, it's like $1.7, $1.8 billion out of a $4.2 billion budget. We gotta figure this out. It's gotta be smooth. It's gotta make sense. It's gotta be transparent. So I think, I appreciate the efforts here, and I think speed is going to be important not only in the procurement process but also in the improvement of the procurement process. I think one of the sort of philosophical questions that I think we also need to think about is the sort of lowest bidder approach. I think the intention is a good one. We don't want to waste the city's resources by overpaying for a resource, but I think we also find that often that lowest bidder approach leads to a ton of change orders, and those change orders end up being more expensive over time. And so I'm curious, new director, welcome, excited to have you, how you're thinking about those pieces and what that might mean to what you've
There are
so
two,
far.
in procurement, there are two different methods. The first is the invitation for bid. That is when the city knows exactly what it wants. We want 100 widgets. Each widget has to be made out of stainless steel, have 8 teeth, and we are looking for the absolute lowest price based upon those specifications. Then there's the RFP process, the request for proposal. That's looking for best value, and that's the change that you're looking for. Traditionally, in procurement, we preferred the IFB because it removes the human element from it. We are moving in the industry to more of a best value. One of the things that I've been saying is my job is not to get the lowest price. And it really freaks people out when I say that. We're the city of Baltimore. We could dictate price if we really wanted to. My job is to promote competition, because if we're promoting competition, we should get the best value that the market can bear at that moment in time, especially including SM Bad and others, so that we can bring in our local people and help and do it. So that is the change that's going on. The difference, though, is the invitation for bid process is relatively short. We put it out on the street, it's 30 days, it comes back. We do our due diligence, making sure we're awarding to the most responsive and responsible bidder. Responsive being, you signed where we asked you to sign, and responsible being, that's your real job. If we're asking you to build a new police station and your job is mowing lawns, well, you're not going to build our new police station, thank you. Then going through the BOE process, which you've heard, of course, can take time, legal, everything else. The RFP process is a much longer process. It's almost double in length because we have to come up with the criteria that we want to grade them on, grade the responses to that criteria, probably do interviews, do negotiations, then come back, work with legal, create a contract, go to the Board of Estimates and require and ask for approval of that and get it posted. But we are moving that way. That's also the advantage of having procurement officers who understand that procurement life cycle, who can help with negotiations, can help with market research, who understand the markets and understand the people that they're supporting as it goes forward. When I started all those years ago, I was working with the police department. It boggled my mind, all the specifications that went into a set of boots. You know, I just thought they're boots, but there are technical reasons why everything on that boot exists. And it helps when you learn and that they partner with those organizations. We are moving there. I can't promise you it's going to be as fast as the board would like, as the council would like, but we will get there. Slow is fast, and believe it or not, and slow and steady gets you what you need so that you don't make mistakes and we don't go backwards.
And if I could just follow up and put some more detail on what Adam's saying, this is a really, really critical aspect of the transformation that we're doing here, because this gets us away from always having to go to that lowest price, which inevitably gets us with the same vendors and often in a lot of situations. So when we talk about utilizing more small, local, minority, and women-owned businesses, this is really imperative that we get the opportunity to look at our procurement, look at the bids that come in from a different perspective that doesn't just take into account the lowest price, but we can also then take into account the extent of participation they would give us for minority and women-owned businesses, while also taking into account their history of working with those businesses. And when Adam was talking about the scoring for these RFPs as well, that's where we can get to more creative things, where we can also even bake in additional points if it's coming from a minority or woman-owned business, if it's coming from a local business. Those are all things that we can evaluate through the process to really make sure we're getting a new crop of vendors, but that's really going to be critical to this.
No, it's a great point, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I think, I believe that requires a charter amendment in order to make that change. Is that?
Yes.
That's correct.
And I'm glad you brought up the ability for minority and women businesses to bid. I think it speaks to broadly the problem, I think, and it's leading to my second question, is what we can do to get more bids on our contracts. I can tell you, I've experienced in my district a number of times instances where, for instance, we were trying to fix a park, and we just could not get good bids, or any bids for that matter. We had to put it out there like 3 times. It was actually for a pool, yeah, and we just did the groundbreaking for that pool not too long ago. So when I look at that problem, I also see it as more than the procurement process as the sort of seed of that problem. It's also, I think, seated in the prompt payment piece, which I know we've now transferred to the comptroller's team. So I think those are going to be important, and I don't want us to forget that the whole system's got to work well together. Certainly, we can have everything rocking on all cylinders for our procurement team. It may be slow and eventually fast, but I appreciate we're moving in the right direction. But we also got to make sure that the comptroller and his team has the support to make sure we pay people on time so that we can attract bids.
Yep. So that's what I was going to actually talk a little bit about. We actually have seen some really incredible progress on the prompt payment piece. A year ago, well, actually, my predecessor established like a monthly working group that was looking at this issue of prompt payment. I think when we came into office, it was about $50 million in invoices that were more than 30 days past due. And so I actually doubled down on some of that work and established what I call an Agile Tiger team, which is this cross-functional team that includes the comptroller's office and accounts payable, where we've been doing a deeper dive on the agencies with the most overdue invoices, and we've gotten that number down significantly. And we actually have this prompt payment dashboard where I can see exactly who has outstanding invoices, how many days old those invoices are. So we've actually been able to make a lot of progress. But you're absolutely right. When it comes to us getting competitive bids, a big piece of it is who wants to do business with the city of Baltimore, and there are people who won't do business with us unless we pay them on a P card, or if they can, go around whatever our process is. And so we know that is putting us at a competitive disadvantage, which is why we've really been working on this issue of prompt payment. And Adam talked about this process being slow, but I do want to acknowledge acknowledge even the progress that we made, of course, hiring the CPO and then staffing up, but then also with Director Lundy's office. Another challenge that we were experiencing is that the minority and business and women enterprise work was splintered, right? So it was happening in multiple different places. And so now we've centralized a lot of that process under Director Lundy and empowered him with the technical tools to be able to really start to monitor our MWBE compliance. And so that is progress, right? Just the establishment of his office and centralizing those functions under him has already moved us leaps and bounds from where we were a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I agree with you. I think whatever we can do to continue to attract and re-attract minority and women businesses, I think is going to be, it's really going to help us. It's going to, continue to supply our city and our residents, but then also help those contractors build up their capacity to take on more and build a strong relationship with the city over time.
Yep, and Director Lundy can talk a little bit, I'm sure we'll go into more detail, but another thing that we've done, and it wasn't perfect, but unbundling, and I know the Council President, that was really important for you, and so we tried to unbundle a DPW contract. Now, we did have to, go back and do some additional work, but again, that's the progress that we have to make. When you are trying to build the capacity of small minority-owned businesses, sometimes we're going to have to break up contracts so that they can compete for some of those contracts. Our mowing contract, that was one of the first ones that I saw, when I got here was, we have a monopoly on mowing, and citywide, right? And we attempted to even break down that contract by breaking down BCRP into different quadrants and utilizing smaller vendors, and they had issues with their equipment, like they didn't have the equipment to really mow our parks and our green spaces. There were workforce issues, right? So we have to even think about breaking that contract down even further, for example. So there have been fits and starts with us doing unbundling, but once we're able to really get that right, then we'll open up the floodgates for more minority and women-owned businesses to do work with the city.
And if I could follow up on that, thank you, Madam CAO, for the kind words and all the support. Speaking of unbundling, that's something that we're about to begin. My agency's about to begin doing training to the major agencies, and one of the things we're really going to be breaking down is unbundling. I was fortunate enough to work with the Bloomberg Harvard team when they were here on an unbundling document that's going to provide guidance to the agencies on how they should look at their scope of work, and when they're beginning with their contracts, how they can take a different approach with that unbundling. Madam CAO gave a great example of that geographic breakdown that we can do on things like mowing, same thing with snow removal, landscape, any of our landscape services. All of those types of things are definitely prime for that. But what I also think we can do is, when we know we're dealing, as we are with upcoming infrastructure, we can also take out particular services that might be a minor component of one project, but with the 6 projects we're working on, we may have a lot of electrical work, for example. So we could maybe just do the electrical for those projects, make that a more competitive contract that people want to bid on, as opposed to something that may go to a minority or women-owned business for small dollar on a project, and they'll feel like they're not really getting that capacity and that growth. Another thing I want to highlight that's coming that has been somewhat delayed, unfortunately, but we've had a lot of collaboration and partnership with BSIT in getting there, and also with finance and getting there with the B2G contract compliance. So what we're going to be doing with that is citywide contract compliance that'll really assist us with our project management. So this will be available to all of you, plus all of our contract administration, project managers throughout the city. So what this will allow you to do is, at a glance, look at any contract in the city, and I believe our workflow of the payment data will be within 30 days. So you'll be able to look at that contract and see how much money we've paid to date, how much money we've paid specifically to that prime contractor, and also how much they've paid to their MWBEs, if applicable, on the contract. That's going to give us a lot better accountability and understanding. I think that's going to go a long way in the community of understanding that we have a lot more oversight and eyes on what's happening. And I'd be neglectful if I didn't also raise up the fact that in growing the agency, we now have several positions. So we're going to be coming on board with, we've been with a single investigator throughout the city for our MWBE compliance for many years. We're going to be growing that team to be able to have more folks on site to be able to observe violations of the Minority and Women's Business Program, to ensure that that compliance is happening day to day, and interact with project managers and subcontractors to ensure that we are, in fact, there and supporting them to ensure they get paid what they agreed to on the contract. We're also going to be having, we've added additional contract compliance officers. So now we have them, similar to what you've been hearing about throughout our presentations in the hearing today, they're now assigned to particularized agencies. So they can develop that relationship. They have periodic meetings, they go to the pre-bids, they go to everything associated with their agency to ensure they have that relationship. And we're doing that in a way that we're really working hand in hand. So we'll hear more about contracts that maybe are going to have a shortfall and talk to them about creative ways so they can still get minority and women-owned businesses involved. We'll be talking to them as they're creating the scopes of their contracts and really challenging them on ensuring they're utilizing that unbundling knowledge. And one of the key things we're trying to do with this training is really to send folks home with materials that will allow them to know when does it come to us for a review. You should be, first and foremost, seeking goals, but when would you be eligible for a waiver? And then also that workflow of how you're going to unbundle those contracts. So we're really going to be hammering all those issues home, and of course raising up the B2G reporting that's going to be coming, because a lot of this is going to also be our agency partners. For as much as we're here to do that compliance work, compliance and project management, of course, starts with the end user agency that's on that contract. So we're going to really be emphasizing that and looking for that partnership. But I also want to raise up the finance director and also Adam as our purchaser, because they've really been excellent partners since they've both been here, and really making sure we're a part of the process. And we have such a greater collaboration now that really hasn't existed in the city. So we're really making sure that when we talk about any sort of procurement reform, when we're making these changes, that we're still remembering the Minority and Women's Business Program. So thank both of them for that, very much so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks for, it's a relief, I think, that we're to this point, frankly. Just to follow up on my colleague's initial question about the best value, when are we getting the charter amendment? Because it has to be on the ballot in November. Given your time frame, it sounds like you want to move in that direction. And are you going to be putting your, a whole package together that we would end up seeing?
Yep, so we are working in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Government Relations and the Charter Review Commission to compile all of the updates. So we're looking at a couple of different things, right? So, and this is actually one of the challenges that was unearthed, is that you have the administrative manual, you have the charter, and then you have also like DOE regulations, council, council requirements. And so we are looking to update that process for the upcoming Charter Review Commission. So we're going to be starting that process now. And then, as I mentioned, this working group with the Comptroller's Office and the Council President's Office, that's where we're working on other aspects of like the administrative manual and even like the thresholds and operationalizing the pieces that would impact the BOE.
So it sounds like, there's slow, and then there's, a little bit more quicker, and there's first term, near term stuff and but it sounds like from your, I looked at the timeline here in your report that, there are some specific things that you want to see in the next, couple of years, not before even the 2026 election, which means that we would want to do this now. So granted, we have other things to do, but just whatever charter-related items, and the Charter Review Commission is going beyond the November date. So I don't think, I just speaking for myself, but I think for my colleague and others, the best value thing is something we've been talking about for a really long time. To be able to give us the flexibility to add points for minority contracting, to maybe even talk about, project labor agreements, to even, just thinking about how we're not spending so much money on change orders, which is totally not transparent, right? So this is super exciting. So I'm just, conscious of the fact that we've got this coming up, and certainly you don't want to rush, but you also don't want to wait another 2 years, 3 years.
No, I do know that we're working on moving it faster. Change orders, depending upon the industry, are just there. In construction, you're always going to get change orders.
Oh, sure. You dig up something and there's something that you don't expect.
In my training, I have it's a picture that there's a yacht and a dinghy, and the dinghy's name is original contract, and the yacht's name is change order that we use, but that's part of it. In my experience, the more we front-load work when developing our scope and our specification, that's what really keeps those change orders down. But they're there, and that's how we're moving it. The chart that you just referred to, we've already started implementing some of those items. We didn't wait, we're already moving forward. To answer your question, sirs, I'm happy to hear that Director Lundy said is, it sounds simple, but it's a mindset change, is that the city doesn't want vendors. We want business partners. We want business partners that the city can rely on when we have something that we need, and that they can rely on us to make sure that we're paying them, and that we are going to be good business partners with them. A vendor, I go in, I get a cup of coffee, I pay you, I get my coffee, that's transactions done. We don't want that. We want to build those relationships. We want our business partners to be successful. And that's the change that you're talking about, ma'am, by moving to a best value. We want them to make a profit. We just don't want them to make too much of a profit off of what we're doing, so that way we can go back to them year after year and they'll be there.
Right.
But that's a mindset change, not just for my people, but across the organization, is that we're working on.
Okay. Well, I would just say that we need to pass it by the last week of July. So just to give you, be totally transparent with the public as well, that's the timeline. So I'm, again, very happy to hear that we're moving in this direction. I had a question about, and I'm happy to hear about a lot of the other reforms. I have some challenges about some of the things that I'm waiting on right now. So I have been working a lot on the flooding issue, not just in my district, but citywide. But I'll specifically talk about my district. In addition to the work that's being done on 35th and Hillen, and I really hope there's no delays on that project, because we're supposed to dig this year, and we'll be finding out soon in another meeting. But there's also, and I'm just using this as an example for you to explain the process, we have 4 alleys in my district that need drainage, and instead of having a major contract, it was done in another way. I don't know all the specifics, but this was a year and a half ago. So I guess my question is, what are we doing in the meantime while we're, doing all of these reforms to be able to move things forward kind of now so that we can get projects done now?
Sure. So I appreciate the example there. So a couple things. I mentioned in my opening remarks about this biweekly convening of the operational business units. So, just transparently, a couple months ago, I had convened a lot of the operational business units around our sprints, right, our city services sprints. And in the conversation about the city services sprints, it was unearthed that we didn't have a contract for safety equipment and safety boots, for example. And so I went around the room and asked all of the other agencies, tell me something else that's mission critical that we are just not doing because of procurement. And they all rattled off issues. And so, and what that told me was that we've built this culture within our city where instead of going through the difficult process, we will either forego it or just completely skip the process and do unauthorized procurements, for example, or emergency procurements. And so what we started doing while we work through these reforms is actually start convening the operational business units to identify mission critical procurements that have not moved, right? And so Adam and his team is working directly with those business units to identify areas that he needs to push. With DPW in particular, we, because of compliance with like the Clean Water Act and a number of other issues that are a part of our consent decree, what we are going to move to is actually having a procurement officer specifically added to focus on DPW, because they have so many contracts, and I mean, by far, they come through the emergency process the most, and those are, of course, oftentimes mission critical contracts, and so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing right now to move the process. But if you can just flag for me on email, we can get you an update about that specific project and why we moved it the way that we did. But I do believe that we're working through adding more citywide contracts. And, you know, we talked about the job order contracting and IDIQs, for example, where we're able to like draw down on a vendor that the state uses or another jurisdiction uses. We're able to ride those contracts so that we're able to move quicker and get, you know, work done faster.
That would, I guess, explain, in addition to budget, you know, the sort of avoiding the longer process as to, you know, why sometimes it feels like our city's, you know, put together by, you know, duct tape, shoestrings, gum, and Band-Aids, you know? So, and having been at the site of a water main break this weekend, as you know, that was evident. So I'm hoping that, you know, we're transitioning away from, you know, those kinds of things. But we also, there's also some contracts that may have expired that I think we need to figure out.
Yeah, that also, we speak to that in the procurement reform report as well. So where we have not done a good job of monitoring contracts that have expired, people continue to do the work knowingly or unknowingly. And so that is also something that we're looking to address as well, is those, the contract expiration.
And it sounds like the solution is what you just talked about with the PO, where you've already got this, if I'm understanding correctly, you've got the, this person, the contractor that you've already selected, the work that has to be done, and then sometimes we just have to, you know, order more fire hydrants. And so, you know, we know to go back to that same person and not have to do a whole nother thing because their contract had already expired.
Correct. It depends upon, ma'am, how we write the contract. So we might issue a purchase order to purchase 800 fire hydrants with the option of purchasing more. When we need to purchase more, we would create a new purchase order encumbering those funds based upon the contracted amount, issue the purchase order encumbering the funds, goods come in, we've already encumbered the funds, there's no reason not to pay, we process the invoice and we get it paid and we get it out. The other thing that CAO Leach mentioned is using other cooperative contracts that are out there. The training that I referenced on the 5th is all about cooperative contracts. In the morning, it'll be for my staff specifically, and then we're going to be opening it up for the organization. It's not just going to be me giving it. We are bringing in a woman from BrickPack, the Baltimore Regional Cooperative, to talk, and then our business partners at Sourcewell, which is a cooperative group out of Minnesota. It's a government agency, is going to be sending 2 people to talk about Sourcewell and cooperatives in general so that we can start growing the use of those, which then also speeds time. As we said, certain equipment, it makes more sense to ride somebody else's contract that's done that cooperative work, that's done the competition, than for us to do it ourselves, especially, and then we can bring those on.
Amazing, working with other jurisdictions, and especially our sister jurisdictions in the state, if we're all, you know, utilizing similar, now, we don't want to have a monopoly, we still want to have competition, but at the same time, having reliable, you know, contractors that others have already used makes sense.
Yeah. I want to add one thing, and I do have to depart at 5:30. So the procurement transformation work that you see before you and that the mayor released does not include the capital process. So right now, the capital process, procurement process is not handled by BOP. There's a wholesale reform of, I think, our capital process within the city that needs to happen, and there needs to be more engagement with DOF and BOP, and that's actually an area of expertise for Adam. It is very decentralized right now. Now, one major improvement to even the capital contracting or the capital procurement process is through the Mayor's Office of Infrastructure Development, we are about to release updates to the Green Book. We haven't updated the Green Book, like our capital specifications manual, for over 10 years, if not longer, and a lot of the language in the Green Book was well outdated. And so that, I think, is a part of the AMR and will come before the Board of Estimates. So that is one major improvement that we are making on the capital side, but there's a wholesale reform of the capital system. I just want to acknowledge that this is only the operating side. Mm-hmm.
And if I could add another thing on the operating side, this is also something that with the infrastructure team and also the Office of Innovation, Performance and Innovation, we're really now looking at the individual outcomes that we're seeing from the agencies, and we're seeing already ways that we can train to solve some of these issues, because a lot of this, in fairness to the Bureau of Procurement, is actually project management. So something that's come out from both of those teams, I think, is that we've seen that there's a need for additional training in project management. Some of that contract administration training that Adam's already begun, we're already seeing the benefits from, and the training that we're about to do to really make sure folks are aware of that process. I think that project management and administration is where we're really going to see huge improvement coming up with our concerted efforts.
And just some quick fires before CAO leaves. We're going to continue to, no, that's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying. She has to leave like in 4 minutes. Council member, just 1 second. What I'm trying to tell us is before the CAO leaves, she has like 4 minutes. If we have some quick fires, let's get them out for her. Everyone else is going to remain, but I just wanted to make sure we knew that she's leaving. So the floor is yours.
It's just a follow-up. I need to know where the administration is on adding past performance and prior performance in our evaluation of contracts. If we're going to build business partners, we got to hold people accountable for how they actually perform contracts in the city. And then for our minority contractors and the other vendors that we have or business partners, we need to figure out a way to do pre-QS, which is pre-qualified services, things that we know we're going to do annually so that we can build a bench and then we can lock people into rates for 3 to 4 years. I think that's a way that we can just cost estimate. It's something that we've done at city schools. It's something that other school districts and other counties are doing right now in terms of like even their lawn mowing. Everyone has agreed to $150 a cut. If we can piggyback and agree with them on that, I think that's a way that we can not only estimate costs based off the usage of how much we do, but it makes his life easier because there's a menu of people to use. So I think that's why I would like a status on where we are with past performance and prior performance as evaluation tools. And then are we building a system for pre-qualification of services so that we give our agencies a bench to pull from and we have people set into actual rates for 3 to 4 years?
Yep. So I'll let Adam go into the specifics, but no, I absolutely appreciate that. One of the challenges now with even breaking up some of the monopolies that exist is that the agencies aren't doing a good job documenting when they have issues with vendor performance. And without that documentation, it becomes very difficult for us to amend or make adjustments to future contracts. And so that's going to be a part of training and ensuring that the agencies know, how to document those issues. But Adam can speak to the specifics.
Thank you, sir. As part of the contract administration team that we're looking at, that would be part of their responsibilities, is at contract start, making sure that they're there at the very first meeting, the kickoff meetings, making sure everybody understands the contract, making sure there's a contract administration plan if it's a very complicated project, so that it really boils it down to make it easy, and then also to make sure that if there are issues with a contract that we're documenting them, so that when something happens and we have to issue a cure notice, or God forbid it has to go up into a legislative or into a legal, we have documentation. It's something that we're starting to stress. In my old place, the answer was I might like you, but I can't stand before a judge and just say, Michael told me. I have to have that documentation. There has to be audit purposes, but we will be working for that. Pre-qualifications, it can be done, but I understand what you're looking for, is you're looking for a stable of vendors that we can use, of business partners that have gone through the process. When something comes up, we can use them on a rotating basis. If it's electrical, if it's plumbing, if it's architectural and engineering up to a certain dollar value, but it's creating that process to ensure that we're doing it fairly. So if we have 30 plumbers, to make sure that we're just not giving all of the business to the first one, that we're going through a rotation, or however we do that in the pre-qualification paperwork. We have to have that out so that everybody understands and they're on a level playing field. It could be the use of technology. Where I came from before, we did that for architects and engineers, and what would happen is the using organization would go into a computer program, say, this is what I'm looking for, I need a discipline in architectural and engineering for trails, and the system said, this is the next person. This is the firm, they've met all the qualifications, this is who you have to use. If they needed to ask for a waiver, it was documented on why. As we went back, architect and engineers and capital is a different animal. But that's just an example, but we would have the same thing for smaller projects, smaller electrical work, smaller plumbing work. It's creating that frame so that we're being fair across the board.
Thank you. The reason why I ask that is because when we do the pre-qualification services, we see that more minority contractors do qualify, and we're able to track our usage. And I think that is one, I think that we have to get there so that we can make sure that the people who hire people from Baltimore who look like me actually are being monitored, also have a chance to be like everyone else. And I think that's where, and I appreciate you for that, because a number of jurisdictions have tried to mirror that, haven't done it yet, but I think that we should lead the way in terms of doing that, because there are, I think we had over 100 contracts for just mowing across 5 different agencies, but they were using the same people, and there were minority contractors who had the capacity and ability to do it, but they were being outsized because someone else was looking at a minority contractor from New Jersey because it was easier because they had the equipment. So I think that that's one of the things that we need to really think about.
So, Councilman, I just want to also add that a couple of things that address this. So for pre-qualification, that's not currently under my agency. The last disparity study did recommend that it move under my purview. But with pre-qualification, we limit that to our consultants and our contracting partners currently. So we do have limited folks that are limited scope of services that we even pre-qualify for as a city. So that's something I know we're discussing and evaluating. The other piece of that is for the small spend contracts under $50,000 that don't have goals. The agency, per the code, are to be going to minority and women-owned businesses to get several quotes to try to work with those folks. And they are listed with all of their NACE codes of what they're certified by my agency to perform in terms of services. So we do have to do a greater job of ensuring that the agencies are in fact working with those vendors, our business partners for the small spends. And that we continue to try to make sure that we are diversifying the pool and we're not going back to the same folks. I think another issue we run into is awareness of opportunities. Oftentimes I meet business owners who say they didn't even know that was on the street or they were unaware of that. We, of course, advertise per our regulations that we were supposed to for those opportunities. But I'm going to be working harder with the Small Business Resource Center for us to make sure there's a greater understanding of opportunities that are upcoming. And I know the Bureau of Procurement and our agency partners are going to be working with us for the 2024 procurement conference we're going to be having at the Convention Center to make sure that we're able to forecast a lot more opportunities that are going to be coming in FY25 to make sure that folks really are aware and building their capacity, getting additional bonding, insurance, things that they may need, but that they have a host of opportunities that they're aware of from June that they can move forward and hopefully become some of our newest business partners as we move into a new fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Councilman. Just a couple other things to follow up, particularly best value. And it's going to be too much for us to talk today, but I want to put it out there so we can eventually talk. You said something earlier, and I was a little bit confused about best value. I was under the impression that best value wouldn't speed up the process from lowest bid. And the reason I thought that, because when I look at best value, it's kind of piggybacking off of what Councilman Torrance just said. It's ensuring that one, market research analysis was done. That has nothing to do with best bid, but what their past performance are. Do they reside in the city? Do they have employees that are residents of the city? All these different factors that can roll up to best value for that particular contract. So I was under the impression that those characteristics kind of fit into that, and because of it, it could potentially take longer to evaluate and do like the technical rating of one bidder to another.
Correct. Thank you, sir. When we're talking about best value, we're talking the request for proposal. When those proposals come in, we are not grading business partner to business partner. We're grading is their proposal to our RFP, and that's what and based upon those criteria. The criteria is determined by us. So that qualification could be small minority business partners, what a percentage is, that you are based within Baltimore, that you have X number of employees, what's your bench strength, correct, whatever those qualifications are, and then we're grading that response to that RFP. When you do that, the cream rises to the top when you do those scoring. And so you have there's always a natural break. The Gesundheit. Then we want to bring those people in and we want to then question them. We might have questions based upon what you're saying. We might need to do negotiations. We determine what goes into that to create the best value. Price can be a factor, but
Yeah.
it's not the primary factor.
Understood. But I guess, I guess the trouble I heard earlier, it seemed like you were saying that that was going to be a faster solution.
No.
I don't necessarily look at
No,
it
the
as
best,
faster,
the
right?
best value of the RFP is a slower solution.
Okay,
It takes
yeah.
longer.
All right, we're on the
The
same page.
IFB is the faster process because there is no human element in it, with the exception of doing the due diligence. It's really, we want to build a police station, here are the plans that we've had done.
Got it.
What's the number? And then afterwards, with that though, is we do ask for things called schedules of values.
All right.
So tell us how you got to that number before we move forward.
Got it. A couple, three other quick questions. One thing that I've always brought up, want to continue to do so, is when we look through this evaluation is interoperability and not writing RFPs to specifications associated with existing vendors that we might have, but ensuring that we open it up. Maybe there's, from an interoperability perspective, another vendor that can also provide hardware, software that has past performance to work with that system that we're using, but it creates the competition. A lot of times we get in the business of always going to one vendor because we've always used them for 20 years and all of their equipment is in the network, so we can only go to them because we write it specific to whatever their manufacturing specifications are and not to the interoperability associated with it.
It changes, sir. I see where you're going with this. In procurement, theoretically, the best contract is 5 years. It's 1 year with 4 one-year renewals up to a 5-year because there are new entrants and exits from the market, and we want to make sure what we're doing. What you're talking about, going back to the same business partner over and over, is commonplace, not just with Baltimore, but across any public organization. I know Fred does a good job. Why do I want to change it? Part of my scope of work is to make that change. It's nothing against the incumbent, but there could be somebody out there who has a better, cheaper, faster, more efficient product, and we want to see it. We want to make sure that when we do write scope of work or specifications, that we are trying to keep it as broad as possible to get as many respondents as possible. It doesn't mean that we can't use a name brand or something of that sort. In the IT world, we can compete a software program or a SaaS solution. Once we have that solution, the licensing, we can't compete. The licensing becomes a select source or a sole source, or if we create a new exempt. We know that we have the software or the SaaS solution for 5 years or 10 years because it's an ERP system. It's not something we want to go back out for. We're going to keep it for 10 years. We know there's going to be 10 years worth of licensing. We're budgeted and appropriated on a yearly basis. So that would be an exempt purchase order, an exempt contract, because we know we have to pay that licensing fee year after year after year.
It's more from a hardware perspective and eliminating the proprietary language that we put in some of our bids.
We can.
Yeah.
I was referring to software because coders don't like to share.
Yeah, I get it.
But
Yeah,
with
software is a
hardware-
lot harder, but hardware, definitely, there's examples in the city
Yes.
right now where
With that,
could open it up.
I depend then on our subject matter experts. For like hardware for IT, I depend upon BSIT and their subject matter experts as they're doing it. I can't tell you if it should be HP or somebody else. That's outside of my swim lane. I depend
Well,
upon
that's
them.
why it should be based off of, I mean, that's leaning on IT, but that's why it should be based off of interoperability standards, right? So,
Yes.
I know specific
we don't
contracts
want
that
to
we
be
could talk about.
we want to be vendor agnostic as much as possible.
Exactly.
So that we can move from one vendor or one business partner or one set of hardware to another and not be tied in. There are certain things that hardware also, that once you've started going down that road, it becomes very difficult to break from it because they are core services, and Workday would be a perfect example. If you said, we want to leave from Workday, well, you're talking a 2-year process now.
Yeah, no
for us to go
hardware.
on.
Again,
And
the
hardware,
focus
yes.
must be hardware, right?
Yeah,
So
but-
an Apple computer versus a Dell works perfectly on our internet service, right? Just a very quick and broad example. So I know specific examples out there where we write specific to vendors, and we could talk about that further. Two other quick things, medallion contracts. So we talked a lot about women, minority, local businesses. With our medallion contracts, is that factored into this?
I'm sorry, what contracts?
Medallion contracts.
I don't know what that is.
One is the towing contract. So it doesn't come up for regular bid or anything. It's the same folks that have it in perpetuity. There are no minority partners currently there, just if we could factor that into this as well.
You just raised a red flag with me, sir. I've never heard of a contract
it-
in
it-
perpetuity.
It basically is, yeah. It's called
Unless
a-
it's, so that's something we would have to look into.
So could we put that, and then, please factor that into our follow-up, interoperability in our follow-up. And then the last thing, council involvement in this process. So I know that you did a lot of comparison and analysis of other cities like Baltimore, like our size. Many of the councils are involved from a threshold perspective in some of the contracts, depending on the size. So for instance, like the BG&E contract, $30+ million a year, we decided not to bring that revenue in, but for them to keep it, it was only at the Board of Estimates. In many of our sister cities, cities our size, contracts that raise the level of certain threshold come to the council before it's even given to the spending board. So want to make sure that you guys include that in the evaluation as well.
Yes, sir. These are recommendations.
Yeah.
We're looking at it starting at a 50,000, 100,000 foot, and we're going deeper into them. But yes, of course, we can bring that in. If the council wants to review certain things, where I came from before, there were certain things that the council wanted to see.
Yeah.
That we were very heavy into capital construction, and the council said, if it's $30 million or more, they need to see everything, and that was the end of it. If it was under $30 million, it was delegated to the city administrator, the director of finance to make those approvals as you went down, and you delegated the authority down. In Virginia, professional services is a great example. At $80,000 or above, it had to go to the council for approval. If it was under 80,000, there was delegated authority. But that would depend upon what you want us to do. And
Yeah,
that's what,
well, see, the thing about professional services, one, it doesn't have to be, it's not a bid, right? And I think there's a lot of gray areas about what sometimes the administration calls professional services or not.
I
right?
follow what the state of Maryland says is a professional service.
Yeah,
and
I don't think providing hardware is professional services.
No.
But, yeah, but we've signed off on that in this term, right? So I'm definitely interested in that as well.
It's a change, as we've been going through, as the city administrator said, because of the way procurement has been over the previous years. But to answer your question, traditionally, professional services are lawyers, accountants, actuaries, medical personnel. I, as a professional, don't count. I'm not listed as a professional service. Sometimes outside consultants can be, depending upon what the city charter says that defines it. That's also part of, as we go through the procurement reform and create the procurement regulations, that we codify those and that it's there so everybody understands exactly what we're talking about. I can't speak to the specific of what you said. Is it hardware? Is it this or it's that? If I wasn't directly involved, but as we move forward,
Yeah.
the goal as we move forward, I don't want to say become stricter, but to become more disciplined in what we're doing, and that discipline
I like
then
that
turns out to give us better contracts, faster turnaround, better payment times, more small minority involvement. Getting to that discipline point requires my group to mature, and like I said, is having procurement officers and not buyers, working with all the agencies so that they understand. This is why I said it's not going to be a fast process. I'm sure at one point you're going to be calling me back because I'm not moving at the speed that you want me to move at. But to do it right and do it right the first time, that's what we're looking to do. I said it since I started. In 3 years' time, I hope that everything that happened in the past would just be a bad dream. And we're not there. And we're moving forward.
So if you could add the professional services cleaning up to
But
it.
I will say, though, at this point, professional services does not go through my group, like
The
capital.
CFO has to sign off, though.
Yes.
So that's
But
the
we
issue.
We will get it in there,
Yeah,
especially.
so that's been the game that has always had. The chief financial officer has not necessarily had the technical knowledge to understand and know or delineate the difference between professional services and not. And things are clearly not professional services, but the expectation is for the CFO to have this sole ability of signing off, and that has been problematic. Didn't want to get into specifics, but if you guys could please include that in this
Yes,
process.
no, absolutely. I'd be very comfortable adding that to the conversation. I think that's a very good point.
So I think those 4 or 5 points, and that's it. Council, you have any other thing to add? Well, I think this has been a very a healthy discussion. Again, this is where the council's really trying to drive to, these more substantive council hearings to really dig into the details, leave a lot of this stuff out of the budget process. So I appreciate Mr. CFO, Madam Deputy CFO, and Mr. CPO for coming out, as well as you, Ty, and my good buddy over there, Mr. Lundy. With that, we're going to put this hearing in recess. Thank you so much.
Thank you.